And we're live. Welcome everyone to another episode of The Two Abdullahs, the Epileptic Prophet Special Edition, exclusive series that you will soon find. This information is going to be available in Urdu on other channels as well, as Abdullah Gondal takes this information and spreads it to a better audience. Oh, I'm on echo. And today we have another special episode. We're not yet done. We're like about halfway done, but there's still a lot more content. Over to you, Abdullah Gondal.
Hello and welcome to part number 4 of the Epileptic Prophet. Today we're going to cover a lot of interesting things. We're going to cover Muhammad's amnesia, his snorting, his black magic, him cupping himself on the head, some of his personality changes. It's going to be a very interesting one. We're going to also go over more of Farid and his cousin's ignorance and their claims about Muhammad's mental stability. But without further ado, because we have lots to cover and people can't wait, we're going to get started from slide number 214. And as a good refresher, I just added this from Heikel's book, Life of Muhammad. Now, Heikel is an Egyptian author, very, very, very famous book, in fact. So on the left-hand side, we're going to start. This is just to remind you what we have covered. We talk about revelation of Aisha's innocence. Now, Muhammad had not moved from his spot when revelation came to him, accompanied by the usual convulsions. He was stretched out in his clothes and a pillow was placed under his head. So Prophet Muhammad is convulsing, laying on the ground with a pillow underneath his head. Aisha reported, thinking that something ominous was about to happen. Okay. When the Prophet recovered from his convulsions, they looked pale enough to die before the gossip was proven true. After Muhammad recovered, he sat up and began to wipe his forehead where beads of perspiration had gathered. Remember that in this one, it's something to remember is after the convulsions or with the convulsions, the sweating was there as well. The convulsions coincided with the sweating. This will come up in just a few minutes. In the next page, we see a very interesting one. Khadija comes home one day and finds Muhammad in kind of a seizure-like state. Khadija returned home and found Muhammad still asleep. For a while, she stared at him lovingly, faithfully, and hopefully. Suddenly, she noticed that he was shivering, breathing deeply, and perspiring. Now, here you notice that the shivering is also coexisting with the deep breathing, the snorting. It will come up again, and it is also coming again next to perspiring. Weird that she came home and she found him in this condition. As he opened his eyes, he heard the angel say, "Oh, you who lie wrapped up in your mantle," when he was covered in the blanket. Now, next page on the third one, we see Khadija describe what Muhammad experienced. As Muhammad entered his house, he asked Khadija to wrap him in blankets. She could see that her husband was shivering as if struck with high fever. A lot of the times you'll see high fever is sometimes used synonymously with convulsions or trembling and shivering. When he calmed down, he cast toward his wife the glance of a man in need of rescue and said, "Oh Khadija, what has happened to me?" So Muhammad again is helpless, is confused, and is asking his wife for help. And that he feared that his mind had finally betrayed him. So Muhammad thinks that he is going insane. And lastly, you see that this is to mention that at times the high fever gave him convulsions. So this scholar is writing again that sometimes Muhammad would experience what we call febrile seizures. They are distinct from epilepsy, but this again back then would be understood as them just describing a epileptic fit, which they would describe as a fever attack of high fever. Anyways, next slide is where we start to get into the next section. All right, and we are at face color changing, snorting, and breathing problems. Now, what happens is sometimes when your seizure activity starts to spread from either a localized point or generalized seizure even, it spreads to somewhere in your brainstem or midbrain regions. Now, those parts of the brain control your breathing, your heart rate, your body temperature, stuff like that. So, as you see in the in the bottom, cutaneous manifestations of seizures include flushing, pallor, flushing of the face, pallor, complexion changes, sweating, pilar erection. These are accompanied by sensations of warmth. Remember the feverish condition? We'll literally hear that his body temperature was actually warm. Coolness or discomfort. So you see the pain, those discomfort features are present as well. Now, we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to notice something very interesting. Lane's lexicon recalls a word that occurs regarding Muhammad's complexion or his face color changing when he received revelation. So the word is ta'rabada or something like that. And it says that set of a man's face on the occasion of anger signifies it became altered by reason of anger, like the color of ashes. Parts of it became black on occasion of anger. So one description is that Muhammad's face would become very serious, or he would seem like he's having an attack of severe anger. Now, if you go forward, he literally uses the prophet as an example for the definition in the dictionary, where he says, the prophet's face, when revelations came down to him, it became altered to a dusty hue. And it also means it can be different shades, appearing at one time red, another time yellow, and another time dark. We see all of these variations in color happen to Muhammad. These can also coincide when you have seizure. You can have your heart rate change, and that could lead to blood pressure changes. In very simple terms, that could either result in your appearance looking very flushed, or the converse as well, where you get very red.
The color changing prophet, the miracle of Islam.
So once we have that out of the way, we're going to get to the next slide. And that is about heavy breathing, snorting like a camel. Now, as you see on the left side, this is the same incident, and it talks about what happened to Muhammad. One day he was talking to somebody, and he had revelation came to him. Now, one guy was really kind of like, I want to see how the prophet gets the revelation, because, it's just a miracle. You want to see the weight of the revelation on the prophet. You want to see how it puts him in a compromised state. So it says, telling Yala to come. Yala came and pushed his head underneath the screen which was covering the prophet. So when he would have seizure, they'd cover his face sometimes out of respect. And behold, the prophet's face was red, and he kept on breathing heavily for a while, and then he was relieved. A very interesting thing to note here before we continue is the point is for a while. Because back in the day, the Muslims did not have a 24-hour sense of timing. Now, what's happening is we have something called status epilepticus in the modern day. If a seizure lasts for duration of 5 minutes or more, or you have two seizures very close to each other before a phase of recovery in between, you can be called a status epilepticus. Now, in the prophet's case, they do report that he would have seizures that would last for a while, but they don't indicate the exact time. So he could have been having something like that. Now, in the next slide, in the next screenshot, you can go back, we see that his face was red and he was breathing heavily. And this is then, and the last one is reported, Omar lifted a corner of the cloth. I looked at him and he was emitting a sound of snorting. He, the narrator, said, I thought it was the sound of a camel. Now we have three different hadith describe heavy breathing, forced breathing, and snorting sounds. And then one says that it appears to be the sound of a camel, right? We went over this in the previous parts, part 2, where we saw videos, and as well as part 3, where we saw videos of patients. They will come up again. But the fact that this snorting is also compared to the snorting of a camel is a very specific detail. Now we're going to go to the next slide just to affirm that if there are any other narrations regarding this, and we find that yes, there are. It reports from Sahih Muslim again, and this is quoting from Sira ibn Kathir, and he again talks about the same one. He raised the edge of his robe from his face while he was receiving revelation. He was all flushed, and he would moan like a newborn calf. And in the Urdu one, I just want to read that out. जब आन हजरत पर वही नाज़िल होती थी तो आपको सख्त बोझ और थकान महसूस होती थी. So whenever you'd get revelation, you would have severe burden or severe heaviness and severe fatigue. यहाँ तक कि सर्दी के मौसम में भी इस थकान और वही के बोझ की वजह से आपकी पेशानी पर मोतियों की तरह के पसीने एकत्र उबर आया करते थे. So even on a cold day, you'll start sweating because of this fatigue and this weight on you from the revelation, that your forehead will be covered with sweat. And then it goes on to add an interesting detail. It says, और कभी आपकी आंखें सुर्ख हो जाया करती, that your eyes would go red. So he says his eyes were red during these seizures. And आप गहरे गहरे थीके थके हुए सांस लेते थे, that you would take deep, slower thake hua, as in like kind of like weird breathing he's describing of Muhammad. This is again very consistent with what we saw in the videos and in the hadith, where and cases where breathing problems are common in seizures. Now, next slide is where we're going to talk about Farid and his cousin. Let's see what they have to say.
Do you want me to go over the comments before or after this or later?
Yeah, let's take some of the comments right now, and then
Okay,
we'll
yeah.
carry on. Yeah, for
Good,
sure.
good timing. Yeah. So I just want to say thank you to Zagros Ozken for the $20 donation. Some jizya money, my lords. Please don't kill us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Epistomophilic Baba says, Chameleon, peace be upon him. And from Myth Vision podcast, love it, guys. So
Thank you so much.
Adnan had a quick question, so we won't dwell on this too long, but epileptics socially awkward, not to be offensive. I ask because there's a lot of hadiths that tell us the Prophet has a strong, confident personality. My guess is it doesn't affect the personality outside of the seizures. They just look like normal people.
I would disagree with that, as I see that the Prophet's personality had distinct changes, distinct vivid changes. In fact, it does have corresponding traits. You can look up Gashman syndrome for detail. We actually have the next half of this presentation is dedicated to his weird behavior. So he'd get everything became, let's say one thing was, if you look at part 1, Dr. Ramachandran mentioned kindling. Everything takes a religious thing. Muhammad became OCD, obsessed with washing, cleaning rituals, repetitive rituals, asymmetrical delusion, symmetrical delusion, like left side, right side, lots of praying, cleanliness issues, repeating phrases. There are basically, then he also had a violent tendency, so soliciting murders. He actually had an actual tendency to violence. He would get irritated if you would challenge him or criticize him. So you will see that a lot of the personality changes will come up. And in fact, what I have for you in one of the sections, when we reach the midway point, when we switch gears to his personality, a special slide with a chart that lists out each personality change, and it's by a couple of doctors, and you can then literally see, oh boy, Muhammad went through each of them. For example, one of them was his antisocial isolation that started occurring when he started hearing voices. He was starting going to the cave for months and months, which was anomalous too. So a lot of
that's
these,
a good point. That's a good point. I actually know someone in my life that an older man that had a seizure and his personality totally changed. So
yeah, seizures definitely caused, and then we learned that like he wasn't suicidal before, and then suddenly he wanted to kill himself. All these changes, so he definitely had a lot of personality changes after, for sure.
Okay, so let's just use one last comment, and then I'll start the thing. I think it's worth mentioning this. You may have noble intentions, but using the term epilepsy or epileptic is hurtful to the people suffering from the ailment.
So firstly, that was not our goal to begin with. We have clarified this in the beginning of the stream and multiple times throughout the stream, where seizures and patients are coming, where we keep reminding to respect the patients. We're not making fun of them. This is for educational purposes only. This term, in fact, is used by academics all the time, doctors in epileptic fits, epileptic patients, or epileptic attacks. Epilepsy as a term on itself should not be offensive. In fact, another way, what I would see it is the opposite, where we're breaking down the stereotype, where if the prophet of religion can be suffering from these conditions, then you should not look down upon people who suffer from these conditions. And actually, the last quarter of the presentation is dedicated to bringing out exceptional people who have achieved insane amounts of greatness and excellence in their lives. And some of it is actually caused by their epilepsy. And you'll be shocked at the names that come up. In fact, one of the greatest, most decorated literary scholars of her time, Karen Armstrong, happens also to be the head of the Epilepsy Foundation, or the vice president, and suffers from temporal epilepsy. And her interviews featured where she shares some similarities with Muhammad's symptoms as well. She has gotten like 3 honorary PhDs from some insane institutes. So we'll get to that later.
Awesome.
But no, I wouldn't say. In fact, we did discuss it's in a paper as well in our initial presentation that the psychotic delusions of certain prophets, apart from Muhammad, where the authors also say that this helps change people's minds and how they perceive mental illness. If prophets and these great people can have it, why are we looking down upon these people?
That is true, unless someone's using it as a slur, which we're not. Like if someone says, "Oh, you're autistic," and they're being, they're basically, that's called being ableist, putting down someone, or they say you're retarded. That is, an offensive way to put it. But if you're discussing matter of fact, he may have had this, he had symptoms of this. That shouldn't be hurtful. We're just describing, medical symptoms. And very last comment, and then this will start. Adnan Hafiz says, I can't wait to see what Daniel Hakikaju response to this video is. So
I
send
hope
it
I'd be. Yeah, send it to him. Send it to Fahid.
Send it to Fahid. Fahid knows all about it. All right, let's get on with the show.
Yeah, let's get on with it.
Let me know the volume. Any issues with the volume?
Next point, which where he says snorting like a camel. Let's hear what he's gonna say, and then then if you want to comment, go ahead, and I'll comment on what he's.
This is hilarious. Muhammad would sometimes snort like a camel when he would get the revelation from Allah. It's embarrassing. So this guy comes in and he wants to see, and I'll quote, "Would it please you to see the messenger of Allah receiving the revelations?" Omar lifted a corner off the cloth, and I looked at him, and he was emitting a sound of snorting. The narrator said, "I thought it was the sound of a camel." When he was relieved of this, he said, and then he gives his ideas in Revelation. This is just straight up embarrassing. This is a straight up teacher. The guy's on the ground, and he's snorting like a camel. So, it sounds to me that.
Okay. So I have a couple of thoughts to share here. Firstly, the word used is ghatit, and that doesn't mean snorting. Ghatit, according to dictionaries, is the sound that one makes when one is sleeping. So that can either be like a heavy breathing, or it could be snoring, and not snorting. I'm assuming there's a difference between the two, right?
Of course, I mean, snoring is one thing, snorting is another thing. Looking at it from a scientific point of view, let's say the Prophet was snorting. Snorting can occur as a manifestation of a generalized tonic-clonic seizure, which is a convulsion, where you have a convulsion, in the narration over here, there is no convulsion. So snorting here cannot be misinterpreted as a symptom or sign of an epileptic seizure. Now, Gondal can only say that the Prophet was having a seizure while snorting if he was having an EEG hooked, and if he was reading the EEG while snorting and the EEG showed a seizure. According to my knowledge, Gondal has no idea about reading EEGs. Does he read EEGs, Farid?
I don't know. I'm not aware.
Maybe he's an electroencephalographer. Maybe, God knows. So the other thing is snoring. Snoring is not a seizure. Okay. So in both situations, in order for us to analyze a seizure, you always need to look at the aura, which is the beginning, the ictal manifestation, which is the seizure itself, and postictally what the patient does. Here, and as well as in all the examples that Gondal mentions, he goes and picks up a single symptom and then starts saying this is a seizure, and this is not the scientific way of doing it.
Right. I'd also like to add an interesting point here, because it's not that he just has an issue or perhaps difficulties with reading EEGs, but he also has difficulties with reading hadiths. the narration that he's quoting says, the narrator said, like a camel, right? And the narrator here, what's that referring to? It's referring to a late narrator in the hadith. Most likely Hammam, which is quite late. You see Hammam is narrating from Ata, from Safwan, from Ya'la, and Hammam is the only person here who may have narrated that, since other students of Ata did not narrate this from Hammam. So this may be an explanation from someone from the late 2nd century. Or excuse me, early 2nd century. So yeah, I mean, even the mentioning of the camel, it's an explanation or a comment by a late narrator.
All right. So here we have a lot of things he said. So first off, we're going to tell you that they play around with the translation. They will tell you one translation and not the other. And then they go off on this weird tangent that it's not snorting, it's snoring. And somehow snoring deeply absolves Muhammad of this. This was not even an objection to begin with, because this was evident from the narrations to begin with. So we're going to get to the next slide now and see what Farid is doing. Yeah.
I want to respond to a couple of things he said. One is he taught, well, there's two things. One of them is dumb, and the other one is actually, I think, worth talking about. The dumb comment is saying you have to read EEGs to know Muhammad was epileptic. Again, just going to remind everyone, we are not making a medical diagnosis. It's impossible. I don't know if it's impossible, but it's very difficult to make a posthumous, meaning after death, medical diagnosis of Muhammad. Even Dr. Ali Rizvi was on the show, said you can't do that. However, you can come up with a plausible explanation that explains his behavior, things that cannot be easily explained otherwise. So I just want to make that point. You're straw manning us by saying that we're making a medical diagnosis. We're not. Obviously, none of us ever said we put an EEG. Anyways, according to Islam, Sunni Islam, his body should be fully preserved, like in the grave. So, his body is still there, supposedly, right?
So just a comment on that. In fact, we literally, in the initial presentation, we were talking about this, and we said exactly this. This is not a literal clinical diagnosis. We don't have the patient in front of us with EEGs and stuff, so we can't determine the exact cause of Muhammad's seizures and whatnot. What we can do is we can narrow it down. Okay, this looks very, very, very much like epilepsy. So the idea of the prophethood can be discarded, as epilepsy is more likely. But carrying on, we're going to get back to Farid.
Sorry, one more last thing I think is worth mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
When he said the explanation, he's quoting the hadith and he's saying the narrator added this explanation. We're talking about the narrator of the hadith from the 2nd century is interpreting it another way, and Farid is saying no, that guy doesn't know anything. the hadith in Sahih Muslim, the narrator is interpreting it as snorting of a camel.
Mm-hmm.
And Farid saying, oh, what does this guy know? Really?
Exactly. That's an interesting one too. Yeah. But anyways, let's get to the next slide and we'll unpack it in more detail. All right. So this slide here, we have two dictionaries tell us about that. What Farid does is he isolates one translation, right? And then he projects that all of the translations, or the only translation, is just that translation, right? And then he tries to seem to just completely forget about that. Why are these scholars translating the word snorting? The guy who wrote translated Ibn Kathir's Sirah, he used the word snorting like a newborn calf. He's a scholar of whatever language. He did the translation. Then the one we use from Sahih Muslim, he used the snorting. Why would they do that? Because when you look at the dictionaries, on the left we have one, and I've highlighted the one where it says it can mean snorted and it can mean braying. The braying of a camel or a donkey. And at the bottom again, I've highlighted that snorting is a valid. They also say rattling as well. Now, again, like I said, on the right side, we have Almani's English Arabic Dictionary. It says snoring of a man during sleep, but then the next one is snorting sound in breathing during sleep, and then explosive sound made by sudden forcing of breath through the nose. So him trying to downplay that this is not actually snorting is also kind of dishonest or dishonest. And then the next slide we're going to go to is his cousin keeps saying that where is the seizure? Like, where is the seizure? This narration doesn't have the seizure, so the snorting cannot be related to it. We started off today at slide number 214, and we talked about, like I said, remember, this is going to come up again. The convulsion came with the snorting and the breathing anomalies. A lot of the times we went over in detail in part 2 and part 3, but just to clarify that point, that when this guy says where is the seizure, he doesn't realize, or he's not reading it, or he just is completely ignorant. So let's go to the next slide. This is just one of the many examples I'm choosing. You can go through the sections. There's numerous ones. And whenever the revelation descended upon him, he was greeted, overtaken by trembling. And another narration, he says he showed signs of restlessness. His face color would change. His eyes would close, and he would breathe deeply like a camel. This is also narrated in Sirat Halabiya as well, and then translated like that as well. Now,
So the bigger problem they have is they don't need to refute us. They need to refute Sirat Halabiya. They need to refute their own scholars. They need to refute the, Ibn Kathir and others, right? Not
exactly.
us. We're not. You're just quoting it, right?
Exactly. And also another thing is that a lot of these narrations, right, they don't always give you the full picture, because you have to understand that there's two streams of information that's coming to you. One is going to be the patient's own experience, i.e. Muhammad describing his internal sensation. And then there's going to be another external observation made by other people that are going to say, okay, we saw Muhammad trembling. Well, at that trembling time, they're seeing him. Muhammad is whatever's knocked out unconscious, or seeing an angel or whatever. Whatever that case is. So keeping that in mind, these narrations need to be read together. And as we're seeing that, we also already showed in Haeckel's book that the trembling did coexist with the breathing problems. And also in first Revelation, this was the case. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the next slide is going to be a little difficult. This is going to be very important because we're talking about the camel sounds and the snorting sound and the breathing sounds. I've chosen these two videos of these patients to amplify that specific aspect of Muhammad's seizures. Again, disclaimer, don't make fun of the patients. This is for educational purposes only and has been taken from the public domain. Hence, we are not trying to infringe on the privacy of these patients. With that aside, pay attention to the snorting sounds or the grunting and the breathing sounds, because the word, the calf or the camel breathing is very specific. Let's get to it.
So it's most safe if we get her to her side.
This is her second seizure today.
If you or someone you know has seizures, I'm interested to know if you have a lot of slobber during them, or if they have a lot of slobber and spit during them. Let me know in the comments if you could.
It's fairly normal for her to spit during seizures. You okay, Raylan?
She's been doing this thing where her seizure is either over or mostly over, and yet she still has trouble breathing for a while afterwards. Sorry about the buzzing. Another one of my daughters is texting me.
Raylan, what is this noise? Jesus. Hey.
All right. So as you saw, again, it was very, very, very hard to watch. But the point that I was driving home was the stiffness in her body and the breathing difficulties and the specific deep, heavy, or gasping for air, and then snorting sounds that sound like braying or snorting of a camel or a calf baby, like the hadith says, the newborn calf. So it's very, very similar. And again, it makes no sense. As you said, if you're feeling bad watching this, the whole point, and I want to reiterate with the keeping in mind that comment from earlier, that I actually do feel terrible for Muhammad. In fact, I understand, and a lot of people will start empathizing with the guy because he had a disorder which was mishandled because people just didn't know better. And he was, in fact, exploited by people around him in a way, or exploited by the ignorance of people in that era. But at the end of the day, when you think about Muhammad laying on the ground, convulsing and snorting like a camel, the fact that they even thought of adding that had to have occurred because his snorting was so violent or noticeable, right? That if you feel bad that the state this person is in, then the whole point is that God shouldn't be inflicting this upon you to give you revelation. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And that's why I say that if you can demonstrate Muhammad having seizures or neurological anomalies like this, then the whole core of Islam completely crumbles down. Because if Muhammad can't trust his own mind, like we saw, how can you trust him, right? With that said, there's another video we're gonna watch, and that will be kind of similar, just to show you another different manifestation of these sounds. There could be grunting, and we'll watch that, and then we will continue to proceed. And then before the end of this section, we will take questions.
President, I know. President. Don't cover the camera. It's all right. Leave it. Just I can't see it around. No, excuse you. Cover the camera. Sorry. It's just plastic.
Now listen for the snorting.
It's all right, though.
All right. So again, that was hard to watch, but as you saw that he first like started looking to his left, and he had a huge grunt which he made as a sound, and then he had a little bit of a convulsions and stiffness, and then when his convulsions stopped for a bit, and he still had that deep, heavy, hard breathing that at times like sounded like the girl earlier, the snorting camel sounds. And the whole point is to show you that these descriptions are very poignant but very specific. And again, seeing this and having your prophet being in this condition automatically disqualifies him from being a prophet, basically. But yeah, we're gonna go to the next slide. And here we have his face color would change or to red or pale. And Ubaidah bin Samad reported that when the inspiration descended upon the prophet, he felt a burden on the account that his face would go under a change. He felt its rigor and the complexion of his face changed. This is the same hadith that was, according to a lot of other scholars, read instead of ara with a za, and it would mean that he would be foaming and frothing at the mouth. We covered this in detail in part 3. But again, we're going to move on to the next slide. Now, here we have Dr. Didekur could bring up patients that almost have literally the exact kind of manifestations in facial color with Muhammad's seizures. So here we go. In 1899, in these spells, she was said to have a nausea, to be somewhat confused, and to articulate indistinctly or incoherently. She did not at first become unconscious in them until 1903. So like we said, that sometimes they're going to have your consciousness affected, sometimes not. Sometimes you'll be partially aware, sometimes you'll be fully knocked out. In these seizures, her face would turn an ashen hue and her expression became drawn. The patient described an attack in the spring of 1904, said that she had a sensation of some kind in the region of her stomach, and this was soon followed by a sense of taste and smell. And she goes on. Again, we see the words turn and ashen hue, which we saw earlier, were the ones almost literally described for Muhammad's face as well. As he would go flushed. And then in the next case, I seem to hear everything that has been ever said to me in all my life and experience a series of orders as if I were passing through a perfume shop. Muhammad has reported some hadith that he would smell paradise. I can smell the musk of Jannah. So that's an interesting one. This lady also hears a lot of the things, memories play back. And interesting that she's hearing voices as well. She would see a little black woman who always seemed rather agreeable, seemed engaged in cooking, and was always flitting about the kitchen. So she had this lady walking around the kitchen, right? Notice, interestingly, if neurology wasn't at play here, this person would have thought, oh, maybe there's a ghost haunting my house that hangs out in the kitchen all the time, right? But again, we find that this was actually a person suffering from seizures. These are very interesting cases that keep popping up again and again. We'll go over them more. Now, if there are any questions for this section, since we did go over some snorting and some really heavy videos and some heavy material, we can take them now.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'm going to highlight. Smugs Killed Wrestling, welcome again, Muslim viewer. He says, hello everyone, I'm enjoying the series. Adnan Hafiz says, one of the greatest arguments for Islam is the unexplainable, unequivocally miracle of the Prophet. But now we have a possible explanation to this miracle. So another Muslim viewer, welcome and thanks for your comments. Let me see, is there anything else? I'm going to show my comment, which is kind of tangential, but it's hard to believe a kind, loving God could do such a thing. It's so messed up just watching that. It's like, I wouldn't do that to anybody. Like, imagine someone intentionally designed, okay, one more comment, at least, which is, did no one in the 7th century know about epilepsy or seizures?
So this we've mentioned before in a bit more detail. I'll quickly go over that. Yes, they knew. In fact, ancient Egyptians would perform procedures where they drill holes to get the seizures out, the demon spirits out, which is actually helping to relieve intracranial pressure, which can alleviate a lot of the symptoms some of the times. Romans, Greeks had written about it. They knew about it. But the problem was Arabia was in that pocket of ignorance. It was way underdeveloped compared to the surrounding areas. So there were certain people who knew something that was going on with Muhammad, especially the elite class of Meccans who would be more knowledgeable and who would travel more to those areas that are trading routes and stuff, right? As they used to. So it's one of them, I think, was Nadr ibn al-Haris, who was a Persian doctor. And as we saw earlier, that they did suggest that he was possessed by a demon. And then one of them, in some of the narrations, that comes up that they were trying to get him treated by a physician or a medical, or it's not their equivalent of a medical doctor, or their equivalent of a shaman or a exorcist, Pir Baba. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that you do see people accuse him of being crazy right away. In fact, there's like 10, 12 verses where they're just saying, yeah, indeed, you are mad, right? So they did notice the anomaly. They just didn't know enough to pinpoint, because his epilepsy, like I said, he himself wasn't sure at first, right? Muhammad was unsure of his own sanity. So again, like the ignorance of people at that time allowed him to spread and enabled his Islam. For example, if he had appeared with the same symptomology, let's say in Greek or Roman or Persia, he might not have had the same success, because people might have been more well aware of that. Or if he appeared with these symptoms in our modern day and age, he'd be driven to a hospital ASAP, like no questions answered. Yeah, that was all I'll say about this for now. We have lots more.
Okay. The story of Job suffering in the Bible, Muslims say Muhammad's sufferings was similar. It's a test. Yep.
Yes, God, Lord does work in mysterious ways. He has these very mysterious ways to test out his prophets, eh?
Yeah. Okay. While I was waiting, there's a couple more good comments. Georgina Thompson says Muhammad had textbook symptoms of epilepsy down to the post-ictal symptoms.
Exactly. That's something like I was talking about too, and off air with a couple of friends and doctors, and they were saying that at times, a lot of the times, which you have to go off on is the description of the patient's seizures recorded by his family members, or these days they'll record videos. In fact, the videos you're showing, half of them are for the purpose of showing the doctor later on. So yes, you can make, like I said, that's the whole point. We can make a very, very, very certain claim that he was suffering from what looks like epilepsy. We can't be certain about what specific reason was causing it. Like, we can't know if it was a tumor, it was scarring from his birth, perinatal issues. Did he have an infection when he was younger? Because there was like an epidemic going on. He did have a couple of seizures as a child. Could have been multitude of factors, right? We just don't know what was causing it. But yeah, his case is so textbook that by the time we are done and I'm making a chart with all his symptoms and changes, and when you change the name of Muhammad out with somebody else's name, that's when you will even see, okay, yeah, you know what? Everybody would have started saying that he was epileptic. So there's a lot of biases associated with it too. But yeah, we'll get to this in a lot more detail in the conclusion section. We're going to bring up, I think we'll bring Ali Rizvi and another surprise friend of mine that is also a graduate from one of the world's leading medical schools to help us talk about this as well.
I was going to say, what we are seeing here when we read the hadith, it's like a video. It's like we're seeing a video of Muhammad. Imagine seeing those videos and saying, you can't say these people had epilepsy, but you can see quite clearly that's exactly what's happening. It's the same idea with what we're describing with the hadith. We're seeing a video of his life, so to speak, right?
Think about this in an inverse way, where if we have no EEGs and stuff, can we never ever determine that anybody ever in history had epilepsy before the invention of those methods to test them out, right? So people did indeed have epilepsy. So then you ask the question, well, imagine the most explicit description of seizures and epilepsy. That exact description is what we find about Muhammad. So from a historical perspective, negating the EEG thing, apart from the EEGs and stuff, we have literally every other thing that would fit in with the epilepsy diagnosis. That's the point that I would say needs to be understood.
And just Georgina mentioned that she's a doctor, so I was wondering from the comments. And
wow, okay, well, thank you. There you go. She has more credibility and say in this.
Smux said, "Damn, these are great points." Will Farid
I
debate you
I
on
actually do not want to engage with him further because the
He
deception you're
blocked us
about.
both. He doesn't want to talk to us,
Yeah,
anyways. He wants to
and
talk
I don't.
about us.
The thing is, like, the lying and the deception that I'm unmasking here for you guys, after I'm done with the whole of this, is like gonna be so many parts. I'm gonna make a specific targeted video. I'm gonna be taking snippets from my initial presentation, showing the straw man, then his lies with a counter in the corner. And I'm gonna tell you, in his response to me, the guy didn't utter a single point almost that was not a lie. It's so ridiculous. And we're kind of showing that through here too. But I'll make a specific response to him with details.
Some.
Yeah.
Okay, just to finish off on with Georgina. Thank you, Georgina. This is actually adding some value to the presentation. She was saying, basically confirming what you said. This is how we differentiate pseudo seizures versus epileptic/organic seizures. I've treated many patients with seizures, and a lot of patients don't have positive findings on EEGs. That's interesting as well. And she says, finally, you're doing a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This is amazing. I mean, you know, you don't know who you are, and I'm just taking your words at face value here. But obviously, you talk like a doctor, so I'll trust you on what you're saying here. Thank you so much, Regina.
All right, so we're gonna come back to the sweating again, and we've been going through over and over again that the sweating keeps coming up whenever he's having convulsions or the seizures. He keeps sweating, right? So let's go over what the hadith say about it, and we're gonna start from the left side. So there overtook him the same heart condition which used to overtake him when he was divinely inspired, and the drops of sweat were running down like pearls, though it was a cold winter day. And that was because of the heaviness of the statement which was revealed. And the right side, so that overtook him the same state they used to overtook him, and then drops of sweat, same heart condition, and he started dripping of sweat, heavy perspiration, even though it was a cold day. Right. And the next, we just keep affirming. The next slide is 228. We see the same thing repeated in a couple other books that Aisha added. I saw revelation come into him on an intensely cold day, and he would sweat, and his forehead was dripping with sweat. Revelation was descending upon him. Same thing. And just to affirm that this was indeed a very common sight for him to start sweating during his revelatory experiences. Now, let's see what Farid has to say about sweating. Because, man, this guy just cannot stop lying. Or his cousin, they're just so unaware of what's going on. It's almost like they just... let's keep watching. Oh, you're muted, Samir. Yeah.
So going into what he mentions about sweating and agonizing pain. Okay, sweating can be a part of autonomic activation that occurs during a seizure. Where is the seizure in hadith? Narration. There is no seizure. Pain can be a part of having a seizure. But again,
the hadith doesn't mention anything about pain, by the way, which was something interesting. You see, he doesn't even share a screenshot of a hadith that mentions pain. So that's just a little side point.
All right, so this is kind of getting frustrating with these amount of lies and ignorance, where he keeps saying like, "Oh, sweating is a sign of a seizure, but where's the seizure?" Like, guy, like, we went through all of these seizures. It's as if they're pretending to either not know on purpose, or they just actually don't know. But we're gonna go through just to show you just some few examples from all the other ones we've gone through, just to affirm their ignorance and show you that these guys are just lying, straight up lying to save face. And he even shows the wrong hadith and accuses me of not showing the pain hadith, whereas the pain hadith had been in the presentation all along. We'll get to that. Let's get to the next slide.
And thank you, Georg. I don't know, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. George Asmussen for 200 Danish krones. I appreciate the donation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right, so here we've been over this before. Khasais al-Kubra by Suyuti. This is a Sahih Hadith. Zayd bin Sabit narrated, I used to write down the revelation. When the revelation descended upon him, he would be seized by severe trembling and convulsions and severe sweating like pearls. It clearly says in this hadith that the trembling convulsions occurred at the same time as the sweating, like Farid's cousin was expecting us to find. And this is not my translation. This is done by Maulana Muhammad Abdul Ahad Qadri, proof Rabbi Muhammad Ma Farooq Siddiqui. Now we're going to go to the next slide just to reaffirm that we have this is from Sirah ibn Kathir, and we see here that he would be gripped by a feverish condition, and that is he would breathe hard and sweat profusely. When revelation came to him, his face would turn red and he would breathe heavily and fast like a young camel, while his forehead would be perspiring on an extremely cold day. So they're also saying that he would be breathing hard and perspiring, and he'll be feverish, trembling condition. So no, these were all co-occurring. For detail, you can go to section part 3, part 4, part 2 and part 3. We went through the convulsion section in detail. Next slide, we're just going to go through that over again. And that used to shake him severely, and he would sweat intense, sweat like pearls. Reaffirming, these have been mentioned before. Now the next slide is very important, which comes to the pain hadith. Now the pain hadith, like Farid said that I never mentioned it, I showed the wrong screenshot. So here we are going to first, the top part is from Sirah ibn Kathir. The Messenger of God would become in pain when revelation came to him, and his face would look very serious. According to one account, this wording should be, and his eyes would close, and we recognize this in him. Now, in the bottom, this hadith, like I showed you earlier, has been part of the presentation, the initial one, this one the whole time. He felt its rigor. He felt the same rigor. He felt relief. The word is qurb. Let's go to the next slide and show you again the meaning from the dictionary, just so we know who's lying. That's the word. It says extreme mental or physical suffering, to torment, severe physical or mental suffering caused by extreme pain, pain, suffering from a continuous dull pain, cause of severe mental and physical pain. At this time, it's pretty clear that Farid is the one who's lying, manipulating my argument, and trying to seem like he's doing something, but no, he actually isn't. In fact, the hadith he showed ended up showing the word buraha, which we know is the one that was translated by some of the scholars as convulsions. With that said, we are going to go to slide number 235.
I was going to add, there's also another hadith where Muhammad said that normal people are tested, and, prophets are tested even worse with suffering, right? He talks about the suffering of fever, and they get 10 times the suffering of normal.
Yeah, and we were talking about, like, he'd say that you have to have headaches, and, headaches are a sign of people of Jannah. If you don't have headaches, you go to hell. Like, why is this weird obsession with headaches? So it's weird when you think about this. A lot of things start falling into place. All right, facial flushing. This is from the same paper.
One more thing. One more thing I just want to mention. I just want to emphasize here how outstanding this presentation is, that not only are you showing the hadith, you're going to the root of the words. I mean, we shouldn't even have to do that. You shouldn't even But of course, that's what they're going to say. The word is mistranslated. That's not what it means. Gondel is coming with receipts, is showing you what the actual words mean too. So you can't say that's not what it means. Oh, that's not snorting, that's snoring. Okay. Checkmate, ex-Muslims. He didn't have epilepsy. He was snoring like during the day. He was just snoring. Like, okay, yeah. Like.
No, but what's funny is, like, suddenly your prophet has said, and then suddenly he has revelation. He's taken over, and then he just starts snoring all of a sudden. On its own, it doesn't make sense. Why would suddenly somebody start just snoring and then turn red, and then suddenly wake up? God talk to me. Like, makes no sense.
And like the other one, he's looking to the side, and
that was very specific too.
Pretty slam dunk case, but anyways.
Exactly. All right. So facial flushing, pallor, and sweating. It's from the same paper. We're just gonna highlight this specific part. Cutaneous manifestations. We talked about pallor, sweating, piloerection. In the previous slide, we were talking about the respiratory problems that can occur as well. We're going to go to the next slide that we now know. Now, this one is talking about the lingering thoughts that I mentioned in part 2 and 3. Now, a lot of the times, not that the experience during the seizure or Muhammad would get the seizure and what happened during the seizure is the revelation. Sometimes patients don't remember the whole duration of the seizure. Sometimes they remember the aura, and in during the aura you have the hallucination, and that's when you get the revelation. Sometimes the seizure may cause an imbalance in your brain that causes your thoughts from before that you were thinking about or thoughts that come up that you then perceive as revelation, but it's not necessarily like Muhammad had a fever, a seizure, and then he saw the angel and the angel told him, and then that's exactly what it was. No, it's just lingering thoughts that come out twisted, confabulated by the mind. That's what he talks about. So we're just going to talk about a little bit this, reading from his book. In the attacks, the patient would become vacant and would sometimes lose consciousness altogether for a short time. He mentally sees people he has not seen for some years. He had also trembling movements. Trembling was very rapid and lasted on and off quite an hour. Dreamy states or trance-like states are other aspects of CPS. We're going to also get into absence seizures of Muhammad in a little bit, so that's also related to that. There's defect of consciousness of the environment, but the person is not completely unconscious, as in syncope, as in a fainting spell. When the patient awakens from the dreamy state, he may then falsely think that some theme or idea that he was originally interested in was revealed to him by the Almighty God. Patients may have amnesia for these dreamy episodes. Then he goes, patients may seem to be chewing food, making masticatory movements. Sometimes more complex activities can ensue. So this is showing us about, like we said, the lingering thoughts that can come out as revelation or delusional thinking. Now we conclude this section here, and we went over how Farid's
Before
cousin...
we conclude the section, I just want to elaborate one point here. We showed we showed an example of a patient interviewed by Dr. Ramachandran. I don't know, I'm probably saying his name, Ramachandran, where he said he felt like God was talking to him. He was having not this, like, he was having ecstatic seizures, not like exactly like kicking the ball seizures like this, but I guess he also did talk about like the suffering and the pain, and he was crying at one point. I guess it went both ways, but he also said it felt like God was revealing the truth of the reality or the nature, to him, right? So just, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of times these people, when they have large seizures, especially, they will sometimes, we've gotten over a lot of cases, the Messiah complex appears, where they start thinking that God has chosen them, and they get obsessed with moral deviances in society. So a lot of these patients, they start talking about there's corruption, you're worshiping the wrong God. They become obsessed with ritual. The one thing they become obsessed with, this is the one thing that pops out, it's the heaven and hell thing. Again, religiosity is not the only manifestation, but it does come out frequently in epilepsy of temporal about origin. But yeah, no, it's a very common thing. We've seen multiple cases of so far. We'll see more as we go along in Dr. Dade's book. And Ali Rizvi was talking about this too, like in Pakistan when he was doing his rounds in for his residency or something. He was interested in psychiatry for a year, and he met a lot of these people that were coming up with these very complex philosophical ideas about the universe, right? So that's the thing. Like, these people sometimes do come up with these very sophisticated, complicated delusions. In fact, I mean, I'm not supposed to say this, but some of my personal interactions with some of these people, that the elaborate discussions were, I know some people that have written books with 200 to 300 characters and have them published. Like, I know people like this. In fact, I know a person in real life.
200 pages, you mean? You said
No,
characters.
200, 300 characters, as in characters in the story.
Personalities.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And I mean, so there is one other one that I know that he starts just spewing out verses of poetry right after his seizures or episodes, right? And I know these people in real life. I'm just mentioning them without mentioning their names, but just to get it out there that they keep saying that I've never met these people. I've never met a patient. I've never seen an epileptic. I have had my quite fair few of interactions and occurrences like that with these people. All right.
Oh, so I'm muted. If you're watching and enjoying this show, we're 1 hour in, and you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, do leave it a 5-star review. It does help us, and it gets the show up in the charts on the Islam category. And if you're watching on YouTube, go and like the video, give it a thumbs up, and this actually helps us as well on YouTube. So if you're appreciating the content, you can't donate, you don't have money, there's other things you can do. You can share the video with others. Please find 5 people to share it with. If everyone shares this video with 5 people, this this meme is going to go viral, and it already has, but we want it to keep going viral. We don't want it to die just yet. And as well, thank you everyone for your who's donated so far, and appreciate all the support. So just wanted to say that.
All right, so we're gonna get back to the slides. We are going to the lip smacking section. Right on. So as we've seen so far, a few videos, in fact, one of the last ones where you see the guy's head was turned to the left and he was laying on the bed and he moved his lips. We saw the girl looking interested on the right side of the world, moving his lips. There was another guy. He kept moving his leg and his arm was like this. So we see lip movements come out. Why does this happen? Because when you have a seizure, right, if it starts spreading, to put it very simply, the part that controls your lips is one of the biggest motor parts or the amount of neurons dedicated in the brain, physically taking space, because we use our mouths to produce complex sounds. The mouth, the hands, and if you want to look it up, it's called the homunculus. They have a figure that corresponds to our brain's neuron dedication if it was to be modeled into a figurine. So when a seizure starts spreading, the electrical circuit firing may spread to the region which controls your lip movements. So you see a lot of times chewing movements, lip moving movements may co-occur or coincide with seizure events, or like, for example, sweating, breathing problems, and other issues. Now let's get into the next slide. We'll go just a little bit over the academic aspect of it. So we're just going to talk about focal seizures. Can include involuntary movements, automatisms like rubbing of the hands, lip smacking, chewing movements. When they involve frontal lobe, you may see bicycling movements of the legs or pelvic thrusting or other complex movements. Complex focal seizures may stare blankly into space or experience automatism, non-purposeful, repetitive movements such as lip smacking, blinking, grunting, gulping, or shouting. On the right side, we have WebMD, staring straight ahead, repetitive swallowing, and this is common in petite malabsence, period of confusion and deep sleep. Repetitive lip smacking may indicate temporal lobe seizures. Abdominal discomfort, the epigastric rising we've discussed, visual sensory hallucination, and distorted perception of deja vu, the dreams, thinking that what's already happened in the dream. Such seizures are often followed by a period of weakness or paralysis. Now, this is interesting. Remember the section, the fatigue and the torpor that Muhammad would be seized by after his seizure? This, again, corresponds with that. Moving on to the next slide. Again, we have Farid trying to rescue his prophet from the inevitable by twisting the reading of the hadith.
Okay.
Let's go to the next set. Lip smacking and jittery teeth. When Muhammad would get the inspiration, he would bear it with great trouble, and he used to move his lips quickly with the inspiration. It would be something like this, which is lip smacking. We're rhythmic, and it's an automatism, right? But what's happening here is Muslims are saying, oh no, it's just because he's following the angel fast, which is, like Samir said, is a confabulation and a post-hoc rationalization.
Please pause it for a second here.
Now,
okay, so the hadith says that he moved his lips. It doesn't say smacked his lips. So that's the first thing. It says he's moving his lips, he's moving his tongue in order to keep up with the revelation. That's the first thing. So firstly, does that make a difference? Is there a difference between that and smacking the lips?
Yes, there is a difference. Moving your lips is just what we're doing right now when we're talking. Lip smacking would be something like, that's lip smacking. And you can go and Google some videos to see what lip smacking automatisms are. Again, this proves that Gondal has never seen a patient seize before. He's talking out of inaccurate knowledge and inaccurate reading. So what he uses is a misinterpretation of the hadith, again, because he's a non-Arabic native speaker, or maybe he's lying. There's always a chance that
it doesn't even say that in English. In English, it says moving my lips. And it says moving, the Prophet used to move his lips. So it doesn't say the word smacking isn't even in English.
Then he's lying.
Yeah. He's trying really hard. He's trying really.
All right, so we're back to the lip smacking bit. All right, on. So first point they make is, well, the word is moving his lips, but he's not lip smacking. This is just a game of semantics. You're kind of asking for specific word games. Like, why did they say that, but not describe it with the specific terminology you would see in today's nomenclature? And that's not how arguments work. Now, another thing you notice, and what they did here, was they purposefully, again, like with the ringing bell hadith, excluded the part which says he used to bear the revelation with great trouble, and whilst dealing with the trouble and the pain, he was moving his lips, and that would indicate the revelation was occurring, right? So they exclude the part, and they lie about that part not existing. Then that same hadith adds another interesting detail. If this was just normal, regular lip movements that somebody's talking, why do you need two companions after that to physically demonstrate how Muhammad was moving his lips? It doesn't add up. All right.
There's another point that doesn't add up. If God is revealing it to you, but like, why are you moving your lips?
Exactly. It shouldn't be happening in the first place.
It's like he's not reciting it. Like he's not that's not moving lips then. If he's reading the Quran, alif, lam, mim, that's not moving lips, right? That's
Mhm.
and of course they're not going to say smacking lips. That's like modern language, right?
Yeah, like
That's
these
a scientific.
specificity.
But again, if God is revealing something to me, why would I be moving my lips? Like again, that doesn't make sense. That's not. Obviously, there's something else going on here.
Exactly. Now, the funny thing is the specificity of this automatism occurring while he's suffering through great trouble, and the revelation, which is we now know is almost always synonymous with seizures. This is highly, highly more likely to be an automatism than the angel actually coming and talking to Muhammad. And apparently the angel would recite too fast, and Muhammad was trying to follow the angel, but he was scared that he'd forget it, hence he would recite it. And what's funny is we will get to the next section, which is about the memory of Muhammad, where there's hadiths that say Muhammad would get seizures, but he would get no revelation, which literally makes no sense. Why is God causing him to hear ringing bells, have these states, but then there's no revelation? Or that Muhammad would forget the revelation altogether. But don't worry, those were the verses that were going to be abrogated all along. We'll literally see these explanations come up, and it's hilarious. But another thing is that in the hadith it says lowering head, Muhammad would lower his head later on in with the lip smacking. And this is actually interesting because this is a separate from the lip smacking, and we'll discuss this in the opson section, where atonic head drops will be seen, and you'll see that Muhammad lowering his head and then raising it back up after a while can also be a form of a seizure. And again, these are some remarkably, like everything you find about his revelation, like literally everything is epilepsy symptoms. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're just going to review the hadith that we were talking about, what Farid had omitted. So as you see on the left side, when Gabriel revealed the divine inspiration in Allah's apostle, he moved his tongues and lips. Okay, so you can see his tongue is moving and lips. And that state used to be very hard for him. And that movement indicated that revelation was taking place. See that they don't read the hadith properly, then accuse me of lying and not reading it properly. Then in the middle, you see the Quranic verse, the prophet used to bear the revelation with great trouble and used to move his lips. The word quickly is in brackets, with the inspiration. Ibn Abbas moved his lips. I am moving my lips in front of you as Allah's messenger used to move his. Said moved his lips saying, I am moving my lips as I saw Ibn Abbas moving his. This was not normal lip movement. If it was normal lip movement, you don't have Sahabas giving live demos of it. If it was just somebody talking, but yeah, he would just appear like he talked.
Let me show you how he talked. He talked like this.
It just, or if it was like normal, like there's one response to this was, it was like, like people like recite and they're standing in the Muslim prayer and the silent recitation is happening. I'm like, well, if everybody's praying all the time and he's reciting, like they could have just said, yeah, he was reciting like, in prayer. the fact that they specify it was weird, it was troublesome for him, it caused him trouble. In fact, the lip movement was so weird that it indicated the revelation was taking place. Seems to me that this was indeed an automatism. The last one, we again see on the right side, the prophet used to undergo great difficulty in receiving the divine inspiration and used to move his lips. And then Ibn Abbas and Sa'id both moved their lips. All right, now that we've determined what lip smacking Muhammad was doing, we're gonna have 2 exclusive patient videos lined up after this for you guys to see what lip smacking can look like Farid's cousin saying, Google the videos. Let's see. This one has no volume. So the patient is aware he's not losing his consciousness. He's pointing at something as if he's talking to someone or moving
his lip. I mean, if I saw this and I didn't know the word lip smacking, I would say he's moving his lips.
Exactly.
Like it says.
Exactly.
Lips.
Right?
It's amazing that if this guy said he was a prophet and he's like, it's almost believable that he's moving his lips to the words of the Quran, right?
He's rapping. He's rapping.
Having coffee.
Oh my God. All right.
Is there another video after this?
Yes, there's another patient video just so people know what it exactly looks like. Perfect. All right. So as we saw, 2 clear videos that this is what lip smacking during seizures can look like. And yeah, it sounds and looks like it's pretty similar to Muhammad. And the fact that 14 centuries ago, they were able to tell you that when revelation came to him, he would start moving his lips all weird is a miracle, or not a miracle, but a very interesting coincidence that the symptoms line them up. Like, how did they know like seizures would cause these things, right? Their own confabulated story or explanation to go along with it is even interesting, where Muhammad was going fast because the angel would recite too fast and he was scared that he might forget it. But yeah, that was a very interesting one. Now, if you have any questions, we can take them now, because then we have Opson seizures coming up next.
Alrighty, let me go to, and it looks like okay, Buddha Boobs sends a $5 super chat. Thank you, Buddha Boobs. And I don't know if you're a guy or girl, but it doesn't matter. When does a book come for sale? I think he means your book.
I just haven't started working on any books or anything, but I don't know. It might be a project that it has been mentioned to me. Maybe there might be a book deal coming soon. Who knows? Let's see where this goes. But for now, my goal is to, after this whole series is done, I'm going to release the slides. And then the whole point is to get this information out in the public, disseminate it, spread it, because this is the fundamental core of Islam, right? And people just deserve to know, both Muslims and non-Muslims. I also intend to make a shorter, summarized documentary, so you can watch it in like one sitting. And yeah, maybe we will write with the help of a couple of my friends that are in fact published authors, scientists. We might be publishing a paper on this. Lots of things, ups and downs. We don't know yet for sure, but definitely that's something that I have in mind.
So I want to, I think there's a much more simple explanation for this. Adnan Hafiz says, I wonder if he had lung cancer that metastasized to his brain. This could explain why he had a dream of his chest being open. Perhaps he had chest pain and that encouraged his dream. I think in the first episode, you talked about this epigastric rising.
Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah, we talked about this in great depth from Dr. Dede Kurkut's book, where he explains that this is a common symptom, epigastric rising, where this is an aura, in fact, of seizures at times for a lot of patients. So no, it's very common. If for a detailed explanation, do refer to part 1, because we went over this as Muhammad had his chest split open twice, at least around when he was 6, then at once when he was 10, then once when he was right before the first revelation, and then once right the night when he went up for the Miraj. So it occurred 4 times. And the fact that this occurred so many times is interesting. Now you can say also that there's a theological idea behind it where, they're washing his taking his heart out to wash it every time. But that also doesn't make sense, because why does God need to wash it like 4 freaking times, And why is the point that to save him from the impure society corruption, that to wash his heart to protect? It doesn't make sense. It's more likely that this was a post-hoc rationalization by Muhammad made after the fact of his seizures.
Yeah. All right. Some praise for you here. Mo Tamim says this is an elite high-level PhD work. Thank you, Mo Tamim.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if Stefan is making a mistake here. He's saying, do you check the work of Hamid Abdul Samad? Hamid Abdul Samad is a political scientist. Did he talk about this?
I believe he has mentioned it in his Box of Islam series briefly. I haven't seen it in detail, though.
Yeah, okay, because he talks about all different topics. Okay,
but I know for sure Brother Rashid is the one that went in depth into it, and I have seen in passing a video from Hamid Abdul Samad as well on this issue.
All right. I don't think there's any more. I'm just quickly scrolling and seeing if there's anything else. Oh, here we go. Pawan Singh said, I admire all the time and effort spent in compiling all this research. With a busy schedule, I understand and appreciate your dedication.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that you appreciate me.
Okay, so almost got through all the comments. Sorry. I think Farid, Raminescent says, I think Farid realizes we're right, but he's in deep denial.
Yeah, it's gonna happen eventually. Like, the thing is, why I waited a year was let them give them time to give the best of their best responses. One of the ironies that I was waiting for is that there people are gonna say, "Oh yeah, but Muhammad should be, fatigued and not the most energetic," because they don't know. So they ironically ask us that this is what you're going to expect to find, thinking that it doesn't exist. And I end up finding exactly that. This will occur with the Dr. Hassan Aziz's paper as well, where he says that epilepsy, results in people not recalling their things. So Muhammad was always in the best states, ready to go after the seizure, spewing out verses. But we saw that was a lie. And then he also commits another lie where he said that during the first revelation, Muhammad was awake and fully aware of what's going on. But from the numerous hadith we see here, he was in fact swooning, he was shaken, he was passing in and out of consciousness during the first revelation. This is what this whole thing is. They just keep denying and they keep making excuses for what is patently absurd. All right.
Georgina Thompson says, interesting that they would mention he would move his lips, indicating a revelation was coming.
It's very anomalous. This would be the thing they would notice. They would have seen it quite a few times too. But
sorry, you want to add anything else?
Yeah. Let's keep going with the comments.
Last super chat. Thank you, Georgina Thompson.
Thank
it's
you
so very kind
much.
of you, not only for coming and
much.
sharing your doctorly perspective, and for also your 45 British pounds. I mean, that's a lot of money, and truly appreciate it. Thank you. And that's it. I think. Yeah, that's all. Does Abdullah Gondal have social accounts? Oh yeah, I need to add your Twitter account back.
Yeah, you can
stop it.
I may just during the stream, because I know on Twitter a lot of comments happen and people are arguing. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna make an account just with any questions I can deal with them directly. But yeah, because there's a lot of strawmans and misunderstandings around. I am active on Facebook and as well as Twitter, but more so now on Facebook. And then right now I'm busy with the Epileptic Prophet series. So yeah, mostly you'll find me on YouTube.
Oh, sorry. There's a couple more actually really good comments. Jeez,
Yeah.
I missed that. Will we invite Brother Rashid? Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to talk to him.
That would be cool.
I think it was I can't find it now. Anyways, okay, skip that one. Georgina, oh yeah, so Smarks killed Blessing said, I'd love to see Mufti Abu Layth's response to this. Let's see what he says.
He actually, if I remember, he had last year in June. Yeah, last year June he made a video in Monday Night Live, and he had a good 15-20 minutes talking about it. In fact, he straight up says that he convulsed and he accepts that the Prophet had epilepsy, but he says that the epilepsy is God's way of communicating with the Prophet, right? So He's kind of arguing from that
Yes.
perspective.
Yeah, which is expected, right? And Apostle Aladdin says, I prophesize Farid poorly response soon.
From what I have seen so far, it's gonna be another mishmash of lies, manipulation, strawmans. I mean, it's not expecting more from him.
Okay, last one. Georgina, again, another
Oh
very
wow,
generous
I'm
donation. Thank you.
thank you so much.
And she says, I would be more than happy to help work on a documentary on Muhammad's mental health and seizures. If you can please email me at abdullah.adam@gmail.com so I have your contact information, and most appreciate it. It'd be honestly, we're honored.
Yeah, thank you so
Totally
much. We're so honored, and we would even maybe have you on in the concluding episode of the series. If there are any doctors or
comfortable,
experts,
yeah.
if there are any
Comfortable with coming online and this coming on. I just keep in mind when you come on and you talk about these things, sometimes it can there are social consequences, so just keep that in mind. But yes, of course, we would love to have you on if you'd be willing to talk about it as well, and connect some of the things, because that would make a good sequel after we're done the series, getting other people from the medical community to talk and reflect on these things.
Exactly, or get endorsements from people. So definitely a longer project for sure. Yeah. All right. Let's get to the next section. So this one's interesting, where it talks about absence seizures. And this one is going to get a little bit technical, but I really want you to see what Farid's cousin does here, because it's indicative of malice and indicative of him just doing. It seems to indicate to me this intentional lying going on here. But yeah, we're going to get to it, and we're going to start watching this video.
Oh, okay. I need to 1 second. Okay.
Another example is what I mentioned before. He does not understand that absence seizures occur in kids, and that these are not seizures that occur in adults.
Moving neither forward nor backward, and then I turned to be away from him, but to wherever region of the sky I looked, I saw him as before. Very important point. Firstly, Muhammad is lost staring at him, and he's having an absence seizure. We will get to that in the second page of.
So here he says that the Prophet is having an absence seizure, and the Prophet here is probably more than 40 years of age. And this again is a proof that this guy knows nothing about epilepsy, because absence seizures do not occur in patients who are 40 years of age. Absence seizures occur in kids, and they maximally would occur in teenagers. Only in case reports, case reports that he loves referring to, that an absence seizure might occur in an adult. What he describes, if what he describes is a seizure, I mean, it's not a seizure, but if he wants to describe a seizure with such phenomenology in an adult, it would be called a focal non-motor behavioral arrest seizure. Of course, this involves staring and doing nothing. The name says behavioral arrest seizure. So please learn and then talk.
All right. So at the end of this video, you see him flex his credential by using complex terminology to describe an absence seizures, by saying, why didn't you use that terminology? Because, otherwise you don't know about epilepsy. So one thing, that terminology changed in 2017. If you notice that there was going to be an ongoing debate in neurology, and many doctors disagree with using that terminology. So given that in my first presentation, I said that I don't want to complicate it for the audience, and in my second presentation, I decided to use the word absence seizures, which is used by many academics as a synonym for behavioral arrest, so that it doesn't confuse the audience. He somehow took this, spun it around, and said that Gondal doesn't know. Next thing, he says that absence seizures don't occur in adults. They do occur in adults, but they are rarer. Yes. So what I'm going to do, I just wanted to tell you these things, that absence seizures have been reported in people of Muhammad's age. Another thing they did in their response was they never showed my main section on absence seizures of Muhammad, which I even mentioned in the video they play. We will get to that later. They never showed it. Okay. So what we're going to get to. So absence seizures are rare in adults, but do occur, as we show multiple cases in upcoming slides. Behavioral arrest is a synonym for absence and is a straw man. Using old versus new terminology does not make one smarter. It's just a red herring. My initial disclaimer clearly stated that the 2017 change in terminology as outlined in the coming slides. Why were my main points on absence seizures never shown? It's more manipulation. And another thing that Farid's cousin won't tell you is that a lot of the adults that do persist with their absence seizures into adulthood generally develop secondary generalization or generalized epilepsy or convulsive seizures like Muhammad had. So let's get to the next slide to show you what this guy is doing and the kind of manipulation with even his academic credentials is starting to seem quite intentional at this point. So right on. What is an absence seizure? Here we see that if they were before called petit mal, again, I keep referring to the name changes. This would confuse the audience. So I'm not going to just say behavioral arrest and all that seizure. Then it says seizures may affect an isolated part of the brain or may involve abnormal activity all across the brain. Absence seizures are one form of generalized seizures. Typically, this type of seizure lasts between 10 and 30 seconds. The person, often aids the child, abruptly stops whatever they're doing, talking, walking, and appears to stare into space. Absence seizures rarely cause a true convulsion in which the person falls or down or collapses. Bottom left in the red part, we see about a quarter of people who have absence seizures will develop another type of generalized seizure called tonic-clonic seizures, formerly called grand mal seizures. Okay. Then there's also atypical absences. The person will stare, but they may be able to respond a little bit. They might have chewing movements, lip smacking, slight jerking movements of the lips. They may have some behavioral issues. It may be hard to tell what is due to seizure or from other behaviors. And then they go on a little bit more, but on the right side, you see typical absence seizures in adults. So if this guy is saying absence seizures don't occur in adults in his first few statements that he made, well, then he's wrong. That there are papers written about absence seizures in adults. Now, in the bottom of the blue highlight, you see, though often considered rare in adults, typical absences with onset in childhood and puberty persist into adult life in 7 to 81% of the cases. Right on. Now, once that has been done, that we've established that they do occur in adults, we're going to just go a little more on the next slide to show you, to nail that point home, that the word that he's using is kind of to flex his own credentials is pointless and a red herring. As you see, although patients and physicians often do refer to absence seizures as petit mal seizures, absence is preferred term to describe seizures with staring and unresponsiveness. Again, now this is another doctor who's contradicting Fide, who says we should use absence as a word, but this was written in 2006. Now, another one that's written in 2020, which is more recent, is after the terminology change, argues for the opposite of what Farid's cousin says sometimes. Absence seizures are brief seizures characterized by behavioral arrest. The term petit mal was once used, but they're describing an absence seizure. In 2017, absence seizures are generalized non-motor seizures. However, this term is not entirely precise. So as you can see that if the doctors themselves are arguing that what is precise, what is not, and this is an ongoing debate, and if I can include this into my presentation, it isn't going to do nothing more than confuse the audience. So he's capitalizing on this one word, and I don't know how he thinks that saying the behavioral arrest thing is going to make it better. I have more detailed articles attached underneath for further reading, people who want to go over this. But yeah, again, like I said, the paper said, absence seizures are brief seizures characterized by a behavioral arrest, which is the word that he used, behavioral arrest. And then he was trying to give the technical onset and then how the seizure flows. That is very, very confusing for the audience. But yeah, that was it. He just made a point out of nothing. He spun it, but that don't use the correct term and to make himself smarter. Now, in the next slide, we're going to see that he said the prophet was 40 or around that age. And at that age, seizures don't happen in adults. And then he said that case reports. Well, we don't have one case report. We have multiple case reports of people suffering from absence seizures around the same age as Muhammad. So let's go to the next slide.
I was going to add, for those of you who want the links, obviously you won't be able to type that. but I will be adding the links within the next few days. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, by now you should be able to get the link. They'll be posted on the podcast page. There'll be a link to that, so you'll be able to get all the links. And this will be done right away, so you don't have to wait for the slides to come out. But it'll be within the next day or two. It'll take some time, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So in this paper, again, we see that the typical opson seizures in adults. But what I'm going to highlight here on the right side is I've highlighted the ages. Now look at the ages that I've highlighted. 40, 41, 42, 43, 38, 44, 38, 39, 46, 34, 35, 60, 67. What's the point? When Farid's cousin says, oh, like adults, especially the age of 40, cannot have it. No, I mean, yeah, it's rare, but we have cases, so many of them, that there are reports. And as you see that these people also have generalized seizures to go along with it, similar to Muhammad. And also, if you see that in the bottom, it indicates that if these people had juvenile absence epilepsy that later on developed into seizures.
What's the difference, again, between absence seizure and generalized tonic-clonic seizures?
So absence seizures are normally a state of unresponsiveness where the person doesn't lose full consciousness. They'll appear to be kind of blanked out and not respond to people around them. But they won't like fall on the ground generally, and they'll come back to themselves and just carry on what they're doing. Whereas generalized tonic-clonic seizures are seizures where you're on the ground, convulsing full-on, tonic-clonic, foaming at the mouth, breathing, snorting.
Oh, right? Okay. What about the lip smacking?
So those are complex partial seizures. Those can be focal, where they can start and they are kind of an opson seizure like we saw in the slides prior. You might see opson seizures manifest as lip movements. So that also, like you said, this section ties back into the lip movement section as well. But yeah, exactly like they're daydreaming. And we'll see videos on the next slide, two videos from two patients. On the left side, this is a channel from a doctor who makes videos examples as education. He's a specialist. Yep, that was it. That was a seizure.
It's just stops for this. He just stopped for a second. He didn't even know he had a seizure.
Those are some other types of seizures. You can pause the video because he goes into other different types. We're just gonna go to the next one and see how that one is.
Okay. No. Don't worry about the alarm. We can win this. We only have 30 minutes to make the Christmas extreme cake. It's okay. Get the cake in the oven.
I need for you to carry out the directions.
Will you be there for me?
Of course I will. Do you have any questions?
Yes. What happens if the alarm goes off? Jen? Jen?
Oh, hold on a sec. I think she's having a seizure.
Is she okay? Should I go get the teacher?
No, this is normal. It's fine.
The object of this mission is to go as far into the earth as possible. The alarm means nothing.
But if we go down any further, we will burn up.
Perfect. So we saw this video. It's very interesting. Now that you've seen what an opson seizure might look like, we're going to go show you the part that Farid didn't show you, the main points of the opson seizures of Muhammad. So these are very interesting descriptions. Now let's go to slide number 249. Right on. So on the top left, we have Sira ibn Kathir, and he says, when the revelation came down, the body and the face of Messenger of Allah would become pale. He would ignore those with him, and none of them would address him. Then in the bottom, it says, we were with the Messenger of God when the revelation came to him. When this happened, he could still see, and his eyes remained open, while his hearing and his heart were made empty for what would come to him from God. That's quite clear. Now, in the top one, we're going to read it again. So he's talking about, oh, Sauda, and she went back to the messenger of Allah and questioned him while he was sitting having supper and holding his milk in his hand. God then sent down the revelation to him. While the milk was in his hand, he then raised his head and said, "You women have been blah, 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 blah." This shows that revelation did not fully absent his feelings from him. This is proven by him being seated, and the milk, moreover, did not drop from his hand. So very interesting where Muhammad would space out for a few seconds and then say something or he'd get a revelation. Another interesting thing is on the right side, there is this incident where the messenger of Allah, this guy was talking and he asked Muhammad something, and the messenger of Allah remained silent. And it was said to him, i.e., that man, "What is the matter with you? You speak to the messenger of Allah when he does not speak to you?" We noticed that he was receiving revelation. Then he recovered and wiped off his sweat and said.
So this wasn't just like he just was ignoring the guy. He was receiving revelation.
So it's similar to like people be talking to him and then you just suddenly go blank and stare like that girl that we saw in the video for a few seconds, and he'd kind of come back. Sometimes he'd start sweating. It might get worse. Generally don't. But yeah, that's what it is. It's pretty interesting, the anomaly where he just starts staring in blank space. In the next screenshot, we have shown this screenshot before. What we're going to get to now is him lowering his head. And in this one, we're just going to focus on the lower part. Then he would lower his head into his lap. This coincides with the next hadith that we're going to show in the next slide, which talks about this. And it said, the Prophet sweated when it was cold. That's the chapter name. And the hadith says, when the wahi revelation descended upon Muhammad, he lowered his head and so lowered his companions. And when the state was over, he raised his head. Sometimes Muhammad be sitting and he'd get like a revelation or something. He'd lower his head, be in that state for a bit, and then raise his head back. Now, this can also be a type of a seizure. And this is where it gets interesting, where the details are adding up in an order, in a type of fashion where these people did not know about epilepsy to have been able to fake these that fits within the scientific framework. We're going to watch these two videos. They're pretty basic, but just to show that is possibly what was happening with Muhammad. Right on. And now we're going to go to the next one. Now you see like the lowering of the head all of a sudden is very anomalous, because we see this as a type of a seizure, and then we see this in the hadith being reported that people knew that when sometimes he'd get revelation, his head would just kind of be lowered, and then he would just raise it and continue on. Another thing I want to show you is that you don't lose consciousness every time. You can literally have the limpness, so atonic, being limp, can only occur in the upper half or just this part of the body. Sometimes it can happen when you're walking around, and if you have an atonic, you can literally fall because your muscles sometimes go limp throughout the body. But here it was to highlight that it could be isolated to certain parts of the body as well.
I just want to point out something funny, that here he is most likely having this partial seizure, and his companions were copying him. They also lowered their heads. Oh, yeah. Anyways.
Oh, man. Well, yeah. So
okay,
now
so there's two possibilities here. Mm-hmm. He was just lowering his head every time God spoke to him, or I don't know, maybe he's having a seizure. Like you guys decide. You should decide. Think about it. Which one?
Another thing is you have to understand that not every type of seizure will occur at the same time, and all the symptoms will start showing up at the same time. Like, for example, if Muhammad sometimes will have just the absent seizure, sometimes he'll just have an atonic seizure, sometimes he might just hear ringing bells and not convulse. Sometimes you'll hear ringing bells, but he himself said that it was the hardest on him. He would mostly follow with convulsions, right? Sometimes he would have episodes of amnesia, episodes only, like for a few months, but then generally he's fine with his memory. So these kind of things, they can be episodic and they can pop up with age and with other environmental factors and triggers like stress or genetics or hormone changes, and a bunch of other things, right? And you will see this in later on in the presentation when you get to Dostoevsky, when we look at his exact details of his seizures and how he was writing the best books in literature, and then he's also having foaming at the mouth tonic-clonic seizures like Muhammad. And he explains this, that he would have waves and different intensities of seizures in different parts of the month, and they were predictable. He would have cycles, like at the end of the month, he'd have 2 seizures kind of thing. So it's very interesting when we get to the details. Now, I'm going to take some questions here right now, because the next section we're going to get into is the black magic and amnesia section. And that one is very devastating for the case of Muhammad.
I was gonna ask you something. I forgot what it was now.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Okay, there is a couple. Okay, well, I'll just say this question. Is it normal to be horny after a seizure due to violent behavioral components of seizures? Arousal awakening may be seen after the seizure onset.
I would argue like it could go both ways. Again, we'll get to it in later section, hypo and hypersexuality, but generally it's hypo, but they can have altered sexuality and episodes of hypersexuality. So altered sexuality for Muhammad would be the 6-year-old child bride, his adopted son's wife, then even like him marrying so late in his life to a 40-year-old widow could be seen as altered sexuality. Him then there were bouts, like we're going to go into the next section, where he would have hypersexuality, where he's boasting about having sex with 11 women in one night and having the strength of 40 or 30 men. But then there'll be bouts of hyposexuality where he couldn't go to his wife's because of the black magic, right? So there's episodes where some seizures normally may cause hyposexuality, but then after a certain seizure, you might have hypersexuality. It depends on a lot of things. We generally can't pinpoint each event or each sexual interaction Muhammad happened with it, what was the cause of it. But from the overall perspective, we gather from all of the women he interacted with and the rate at what he was going at, and the nature of the interaction, that it was generally resulted from the sexual urges or lack of sexual urges coming from seizures, because seizures impact your sexuality and your brain is tired, your brain's used up all the neurotransmitters. But yeah, just to put it simply.
All right, thanks for that. D says, I can't imagine how many hours were spent going through hadith, tafsir, dictionary definitions, secondary references, books on epilepsy, trying, not just reading books on epilepsy. Tell her about one of the books you got. It had a hole in it.
Yeah, so the book I got, Dr. Kurkut's book about Muhammad's epilepsy, literally had a stab in the back of the book. And then another book I got, the book In Spite of Epilepsy by Dr. Matthew Woods, literally had some Muslim putting brackets on the outsides and writing, "This is all false, this is not true, don't believe this liar," in the copies, in printed copies. I'm like, what the hell? Bear in mind, like, one of them was a secondhand copy, but still, like, the book being stabbed is quite absurd.
It's kind of hard to find some of these books. Like that's
yeah.
Right? I mean, we ordered one book from India. I paid $200 for it, never got it, so I got a refund, thankfully. But like that's how hard it is to find some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not easy to do. So anyway, so yeah, that's I can attest to that. He showed me a photo a while back. Okay, so there's not many other comments, so that's good. We can continue if you like and go to the next section. And I remember my question. You said there's an example of Muhammad where he had some seizure or something with no revelation. Which one was that?
So we're gonna get to that later. We're in this section. It's coming up. It's coming right up. So in this memory, this section is about his memory problems. So this is the one. All right.
Yeah, books under attack. That's funny. I just wanted to read that comment. Okay.
A lot of times what happens with epilepsy is like Farid's cousin said, that they might have amnesia. And amnesia can manifest in episodes, right? And these episodes can be where you're forgetting normal things in life, and you can have issues with the memory. Now, did Muhammad have any issues with his memory? Indeed, he did. In fact, in Sahih al-Bukhari, Muslim, in a bunch of books, we hear references where Muhammad had magic worked upon him, and he would forget day-to-day tasks. Then Muhammad's magic became so severe that he couldn't have sex with his wives. That was the hyposexuality, but that the alterations that happened. He also had visual field defects. He almost lost his sight. He would fall on the ground in a catatonic state with no control of his limbs. He started cupping himself on the head, which can cause internal bleeding in the skull and memory loss. And that would end up happening. Yeah, we're going to get to all of this. Let's get started. So we have transient epileptic amnesia from a couple of authors. It's 2 different papers. So on the left side, we see just an overview. Transient epileptic amnesia has been considered a syndrome of mesial temporal lobe epilepsy characterized by 1. Recurrent episodes of isolated memory impairment of epileptic cause, ictal or postictal, while other cognitive functions remain intact. Interictal memory disturbances of accelerated long-term forgetting and autobiographical and topographical amnesia, and late age of onset with a mean of 57 years. Something I need to mention to you, Muhammad, I believe, is said to have had his episodes of black magic causing him memory issues and sexual issues in the last 3 to 5 years of his life. And that adds up to coinciding with the 57-year age onset, because Muhammad died between the ages of 60 to 63, depending on which narration you go by. It's quite interesting that Muhammad also has his amnesia occur at the same average age that is recorded in this paper. On the right side, we see case reports over the past 100 years have raised the possibility that epilepsy can manifest itself in episodes of amnesia. Recent research has established that this is indeed the case. Transient epileptic amnesia is a distinctive syndrome of temporal lobe epilepsy, principally affecting middle-aged people, giving rise to recurrent brief attacks of amnesia, often occurring on waking. With that said, we're going to go look at the next video. This one is going to be funny. Let's see what Farid and his cousin have to add today. It's muted.
So if you had thousands of seizures originating in your temporal lobe, you will have a memory of someone who is demented or in early dementia.
So one thing to note is that firstly says that it has to be early dementia or bad dementia. No, it does not necessarily need to be. Like we said, it can be episodes of amnesia, right? Now, when we go, Farid's cousin said that the Prophet never had any memory problems, right? And he said he didn't have amnesia. But when we open Sahih al-Bukhari in the next slide, what do we see in the book of medicine from Sahih al-Bukhari? Narrated Aisha.
By the way, like everybody knows this story, like,
right? Like
even I know this story. Okay, that's not really a good example, but this is a common trope against Muhammad. He had black magic work on him.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I'm just saying, like, this is he knows this. He knew this for sure.
Yeah.
Anyways,
like I said, the intentional lying, right?
Yeah.
Magic was worked on Allah's apostle so that he used to think that he had sexual relations with his wives while he actually had not. Sufyan said this is the hardest kind of magic as it has such an effect. Now, imagine to the point where a guy forgets that he had sex. Now, I remember Mufti Abu Layth talking about this, and he got so heated with the debate in a conversation with Dr. Abdul Majid, the same guy who had the debate with Apostate Prophet. Okay. They had a 5-6 hour conversation in Bukhari Gate, and this thing came up. I might add it just for you guys to see in the next part, but it was just, yeah, but Mufti Abu Layth was like angry, like, how can you say Muhammad can forget that he had sex with his wives and then expect to believe that he's getting revelations from God? If he can forget that he had sex with his wives, how does he even remember or recall the revelations that were sent to him during this period?
That's one line you never want to say to your wife. I've had better.
Well, yeah. So anyways, this wasn't isolated to his sexual urges, his lack or his memory problem. When we go to the next slide, We elaborated again in Sahih Bukhari that Allah's apostle was affected by magic so much that he used to think that he had done something which in fact he did not do. He then started forgetting day-to-day tasks. And this we will show in the next few slides. It gets really bad. Now, the point we need to take here, the guy is forgetting he had sex with his wives or not. He forgets what he's done or not. How at this point, Muhammad is of a weak memory and a weak mind, and by hadith standards, he'd be rejected as a weak or daif narrator. Straight up, I'm not even joking. You can't take hadith from Muhammad. He's not of sound mind.
Because he has magic affecting him.
This is his irony.
I'm curious. Is there, you know how they don't like they get rid of narrators who have bad memory? Do they have an excuse? Do they get rid of narrators that had magic affected on them too?
That's actually a good one. You know,
I never heard
to look into that. Yeah, or like a narrator that was possessed by a jinn in his life, and then if he accept his narrations or not.
Magic, I have to read this comment right now because it's so appropriate. Magic is a much more reasonable explanation than memory loss. Yeah.
Like, right, guys? Like, come on, of course. It's 7th century Arabia. What could go wrong?
I just got to call the elephant in the room. Like, we're talking about, like, a religion that, you know, says magic is a real thing. So I'm not surprised they want to say he didn't have epilepsy. If like, the worldview is totally messed up.
I
like,
know.
If magic is real, then like anything goes, right?
If you read the continuation of this hadith, it is so bizarre that then he has a dream where these two men come and tell him about the magic. It's just
in the well, and he had to take some hairs off the doll or something. And
guy, like, what are you on, dude? Anyways, we're gonna go to the next slide, and this is interesting, even worse, where we find out how long this lasted. Some people say it was 40 days. There's hadith that say it was 6 months. He was having amnesia for 6 months, for half a year. How could you trust this guy as a prophet to reliably transmit to you the revelations of God, as you can see from this fatwa from Islam Web?
Interesting. I would, a Muslim would probably say Allah caused him to forget.
Well, that's what it has in the Quran. That's a literal verse.
Yeah.
That we will not make you forget except what we will, like what we want you to forget. So
this is a part of prophethood, to forget what God told you, apparently.
Exactly. Now just think about it. For 6 months, your prophet cannot remember if he had sex, forgetting daily tasks, or even 40 days. It's just bizarre. You cannot believe during this time, the 6 months, how much Quranic revelation came down. Can we trust it? It's a big question mark. Did he even give all of the Quranic revelation to us? Because he forgot, because he's having memory problems.
I'm really starting to wonder how the companions managed this.
Think about
it's bizarre, like all of these revelations.
The satanic verses make sense now.
Can you explain that?
So the satanic verses were the point in the Meccan phase of Muhammad's life where he was being pestered by the Meccans to show him a sign, and it was one form of conceding to get some of the persecution alleviated was to praise their gods. And this happened in the end of Surah Najm, where he called their 3 gods Lat, Manat, al-Uzza as high-flying cranes. And then later on, he came back and corrected himself and says, no, those were abrogated. It was Satan that told me to do that, and I removed those. But funny thing is, in Surah Hajj, verse 52, Allah admits that, the Satan can literally inject words into his revelation. So at this point, with this given in context, we can see that Muhammad's memory things, and there's other ideas about this where he's mixing up characters as well. Dr. Didekurkut brings it up, like biblical stories and Talmudic stories, which he might have heard in his early merchant years when he traveled for the trading. But later on, when he's reconstructing the stories when he's 40, 50, he mixes up details where people that are hundreds of years apart became daughter and son. As you know, like Christians have talked about this for quite a few times. But again, that's just one aspect of it. We're gonna go further, and we have another Farid video coming up next.
Oh yeah. Was one comment I wanted to share. Sal EXTC said there was another hadith that Muhammad told the random guy would recite the Quran. Bless you, I forgot this verse.
It's coming up. It's all coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
like-
we're gonna play this video.
Man, we are making Farid famous. Like, this is amazing.
Farid the fraud.
If you have a problem with your temporal lobe, you might have a visual field defect. Do we have any reports of that? I don't believe we have any reports.
No.
Oh man, this poor guy is like they just don't know. They just don't know the literature. So I'm just gonna quickly go over what it says on the right side. So a short report: post-ictal blindness, ictal meaning seizures. So blindness can occur, or visual field defects. Cortical blindness following grand mal seizures occurred in 5 adult patients. The causes of seizures included idiopathic epilepsy, vascular accident, brain cyst, acute encephalitis, and chronic encephalitis. Blindness was permanent in 1 patient, but the others recovered within several days, since most of the patients were either unaware of or denied their blindness. It is possible that this event goes often unrecognized. Now, despite this being hard to detect 14 centuries ago, this was still recorded. We're going to go to the next slide and show you that, like I said, Farid's cousin is saying Muhammad didn't have visual field defects. He, in fact, did. So, during the Black Magic episode, we're going to be reading this from, I believe this is the book of Qadi Ayaz Ash-Shifa. And it says on the left side, Az-Zubayr said, the Jew of Banu Zurayq tribe bewitched Allah's messenger and cast that magic amulet into a well. The messenger of Allah was subsequently about to deny his sight till Allah guiding him what they did. On the right side, again, it says, he assumed the story became apparent for you that magic was conducted against the Prophet's body and organs, not against his heart, thought, and mind. Yet it affected his sight and prevented him from having intercourse with his women and eating. It caused his body to be weak and afflicted with ailment. And we're going to get to the next highlighted bit. So that was done due to the disorder of his sight, as stated in the hadith, and thereby he would think that he saw one of his wives or watched an act to be done by others, but he did not do that, indeed owing to being impaired and weak in his sight, not because of any disability to distinguish it. But yeah, it mentions that Muhammad had an issue with his eyesight, and I believe one of it says that he would try to grab a doorknob and he wouldn't be able to grab it. That hadith might be coming up next.
Oh wow! Is that why we 4 witnesses for adultery? Because the Prophet couldn't really see very well.
Oh my god, that is funny. But yeah, now we have a visual field.
Qadi Iyad is quoting a hadith that said he couldn't see properly. That
yeah. So he's describing the issues with Muhammad's sight, bodies and organ. I just want to read this one thing. He imagined the things that he done not so. Yeah. So that was done to the disorder of his sight, as stated in the hadith, and thereby he would think that he saw one of his wife or watched an act to be done, but he did not do that, indeed, owing to being impaired and weak in his sight. Right? But anyways, we're going to go to the next one. We then have Ibn Qayyim in his Tafsir of Mawuzatain. He says, they say the scholars that the magic that afflicted him was temporary illness which God cured him of. There is no shortcoming in that and no defect in any way. For illness is permissible for the prophets as well as fainting. So it alludes to a lot of the other prophets fainting too. He, peace be upon him, as in Muhammad, fainted in his illness, and he fell when his feet was dislocated and his leg was grazed and cut. For this is amongst the trials which increases. So Allah afflicted him with magic, and it caused him to lose his balance, fall. He would faint, and the fainting is tied into him falling and hurting his leg. As we see again, this is another interesting thing reported by Ibn Kathir. Why does this coincide with his magic and fainting, right? Going forward.
Can I just read this comment? I thought this is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So then Alexander says, a prophet can't be sick for the same reason everybody else gets sick. Because back then, the sickness, bad luck, etc. all had a moral component to them. Thus, a perfect prophet needs an elaborate mythology. This explanation
Mm-hmm.
me just fits really well. Of course, the prophet didn't get sick. Of course, he didn't have illness. It was magic. I mean, to me, that's even worse. That magic worked on the prophet. I thought he's supposed to be like some superior, pure, like it's bizarre. Like he's the one that's leading Quran more than anyone else, and magic worked on. It's kind of bizarre if that's the reason, but that's a fascinating idea. That if that's like if that was the thinking behind using magic to explain it away.
Exactly. It's just like because they have to save his
Save him.
mental
He's
health.
just like, yeah, his mental health has to be saved. That's what it
They
is.
have to unload the burden from the mental health, from memory loss, and project it onto mythology, i.e., magic. That would explain.
That
Otherwise, Muhammad's memory
does make
problems show not sound of mind, hence he won't be accepted as a hadith narrator.
Oh, that's epic. Oh man.
Right? But yeah, we're gonna go to the next one, and this is a paper from
Muhammad, the unreliable hadith narrator, had magic on him. He had memory loss, forgot verses of Quran. He forgot verses of Quran. You want to trust him to narrate hadith?
Exactly.
So basically, none of the hadith are valid anymore because Muhammad himself is an unreliable translator.
Oh man.
Unreliable narrator, I mean. Oh my god, that's such an incredible insight. I mean, it's funny because it's ridiculous, but it just shows you how ridiculous this is.
Exactly. Like it just doesn't add up. Now, next slide is going to get even more interesting. This is a paper published in a Journal of Semitic Studies in 2000 by University of Chicago, Doc David Cook. I mean, it's academic paper. You can read it from full detail. It goes over all the narrations, how the story evolved, who says what, the Shia, the Sunni, early scholars, medieval scholars, later modern scholars. But you just got to notice something. On the left side in the highlight, it says, one of the most unusual stories associated with the Quranic surah regards one, Labid al-Asim, the Jew, who, according to many accounts, managed briefly to bewitch the Prophet Muhammad, leaving him in a catatonic state.
That means like unresponsive?
Yeah, or like limp, or like, yeah, unresponsive,
Okay.
basically. On the right side, it says, Sunnis also continue to mention the story of this guy. And then he says, but he allows that some of the limbs of the prophet were out of his control for a time. Again, this is a long paper.
Man. This is so weird.
Yeah.
It's not just like mythology. It's like mythology which you don't know which one's the correct word. It's like there was 50 copies of like Harry Potter and they're all different. And you don't know which is the right one, and people actually believe in it.
Exactly. It's just
it's wild.
So now the next slide is just graphic imagery, but just fair warning. This is, I think, Ibn Qayyim's book, and he's quoting on the left side. And this is interesting. So what you see on the right is what Muhammad started doing to alleviate the magic. Okay, he's thinking he's having memory problems and stuff. He starts to fix it by cupping himself with a horn on his head. As you see at the bottom, Abu Ubaidah has mentioned in Gharib Hadith that Abdurrahman narrated, the Prophet has his head cupped with a horn after a spell was cast onto him. We've seen from other hadith before that he had unilateral headaches, i.e. migraines on one side of the head, and he would cup his head as well. And what it looks like with blood coming out is what's on the picture on the right. Now, I don't need to explain to you why draining blood from your brain area is not a good idea, especially with vacuum suction cups. And it creates, we'll see in the next few slides what ends up happening. So as we see, we have on the left side a reference, National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, about cupping. In vet cupping, the skin is pierced and blood flows into the cup, like we saw in the picture. Safety, it says cupping can cause side effects such as persistent skin discoloration, scars, burns, and infections, and may worsen ischemia psoriasis. But here's the interesting bit. Rare cases of severe side effects have been reported, such as bleeding inside the skull after cupping on the scalp and anemia from blood loss after repeated wet cupping. On the right side, we say the Prophet had himself cupped 3 times in the veins at the sides of his neck on the shoulders. Mama said, I got myself cupped and I lost my memory so much so that I was instructed to recite Fatiha by my friends. He had himself cupped at the top of the head. Now, funny thing is, Muhammad in the prior hadith we saw, did cup himself in the top of the head. And this hadith right under.
How would he read Fatiha if he has memory loss? Wouldn't he forget? He might forget Fatiha too, right? Which is ironic because Prophet Muhammad wanted people. I'm saying Prophet Muhammad, but Muhammad wanted people to memorize the Quran, but like he's teaching people things that actually damage their memory. This is an amazing hadith. If I've seen this hadith, it didn't reflect on it. Like
So-
the memory loss part. That's
So
wild.
Muhammad's companion followed his advice and ended up causing himself this fucking hey guy.
I have people in my life today, not today, but I mean, I was a Muslim guy, and he did the cupping. I asked him what happened. He didn't do it on his head, thankfully. It was wet cupping. He said he got sick. He was vomiting, and
yeah,
I was like, I would never do that. Even as a Muslim, I was scared of doing that. It was like, it looks so weird to me.
And the funny thing is, the guy on the top hadith says he got cupped in the middle of his head, on the top of his head, and that's what causes memory loss. Look at what Muhammad does in the hadith under. Allah's apostle was cupped on the middle of his head.
Oh my God.
Like, it's the
This is
irony of
crazy.
ironies. And no wonder his fucking memory's messed up. Sorry for the
This is
language.
wild. This is like mind blowing. This is like evidence. This is scientific evidence right here. Muhammad made his memory loss worse. How can you refute this? This is wild. You don't even need a scientific paper. The other hadith
refutes itself.
The other hadith says right there
that they were telling him that it happened to him because he cupped himself on the middle of that.
Oh my God, this is wild. Man. Next slide.
Right on. So yeah, the next slide is Muhammad would forget the Quran, right? Like we talked about the hadith. A prophet heard a man reciting the Quran. He said, "May Allah bestow mercy upon him. He has reminded me of such and such verse and surah. Heard a man reciting at night. He reminded me of this, which I was caused to forget." So he goes on and on about the same affirmation. Yeah, and he even prays for the guy, "Be merciful to Abad for reminding me of the forgotten verses and surahs."
Oh, that's the one.
Yeah, so Muhammad's now forgetting the Quran. So let alone he'll be accepted as the hadith transmitter. He can't even memorize the Quran. What kind of a hafiz is he? He'd be rejected in a hifz competition. He'd forget.
Oh my God, this is wild. Like the repercussions of these statements are so devastating to Islam.
Exactly. And now we are coming up to the Muhammad would forget what Gabriel told him. So the next slide, we're going to go to Sirat Halabiya. I'm using the Urdu one. I'm going to read it out for you and I'm going to translate it quickly. एक रिवायत है कि वही की जो दूसरी सूरत थी यानी जिब्राइल आदमी की शक्ल में आते थे तो ऐसा भी हो जाता था कि जो आप याद करते थे वो जहन से निकल जाता था. So he's saying in one narration it's narrated that the second form where Gabriel would come in the form of a man, sometimes it would happen that whatever you would memorize, you would forget. It would escape your mind. ये सिर्फ वही होती थी जो मंसूख होने वाली हुई थी, लिहाजा हक ताला की तरफ से आप पर इसके सिलसिले में फरामोशदारी कर दी जाती थी. So he's saying the one that he forgets is the revelation that Allah planned all along to abrogate anyway. So even if he forgot, he's not lost anything.
Coincidence. It just happened to be the one he forgot, right?
Yeah. So then he goes on, गोया जहन से निकाले जाने का मतलब यही होता था कि इस वही को मंसूख होना है. So the point of Allah making him forget was that it's being cancelled. So what he's saying is a verse being cancelled can be synonymous that Muhammad might have just forgotten it. मंसूख होता था क्योंकि जो वही हमेशा बाकी रहने वाली थी उनको खुद अल्लाह ताला आपके ज़हन और कल्ब में जमा देते थे. So the verses that were not going to be cancelled, he won't forget them, or Allah will make him remember those ones better. But yeah, this one narration, and then in the next slide we have Sirat Halabiya reiterate this same thing again. वही मुझ पर दो तरह से आती है. एक तो ये कि जिब्राइल मेरे पास आते हैं. So revelation comes to me two ways. One is that Gabriel comes to me. और जिस तरह एक आदमी दूसरे आदमी से मिलता है, like a man meeting another man, और इस तरह मुझसे मिलते हैं. So Gabriel meets him like he's meeting a man. ये वही मेरे ज़हन से निकल भी जाती है. Muhammad is saying, sometimes this revelation escapes my mind. और दूसरी सूरत में इसी तरह वही आती है जो कुछ घंटी की आवाज़ सी होती है. And then sometimes revelation comes to me in another form, which is like the ringing of the bell. This one मेरे कल्ब के अंदर जम जाती है और कभी ज़हन से नहीं निकलती. So he says that when he gets the ringing bell sounds, that one he never forgets. That one stays in his heart. But when Gabriel comes to him in the form of a man, that one can sometimes be forgotten. But yeah, he goes on the same thing, explaining the same thing, and how he talks to Gabriel. Sometimes he forgets. So that was a very, very interesting section that's now coming to a conclusion. Now, if you have any comments, any questions from people, we'll take them now, because this was a roller coaster where Muhammad's cupping himself on the head, his falling, hurting his leg, catatonic state, losing control of his limbs, forgetting he had sex, forgetting he did things for 6 months. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I know. This is wild. The astronomer says, do you think that guys think that Farid cupped himself, which is why he doesn't remember these hadith?
I mean, it is sunnah. He can't even be offended at us asking him to cup his own head.
Yeah.
Because if he gets offended at that, that means he's offended at Muhammad cupping his own head. Hence, he's offended at the sunnah. So yeah, he should definitely try the prophetic sunnah once in a while, or ask his cousin if cupping yourself on the head is a good idea, because he's a neurologist, right?
Oh, that's a challenge to Farid right there. Great Jedi is just laughing at what we said. Hadith transmitted with memory loss. This is not just Hadith transmitted. This is Quran transmitted from Gabriel. You have Gabriel, then you have memory loss person, then you have other companions. So who cares if the Quran's mutawatir, even though it's not mutawatir? Your main transmitter has memory problems.
It opens so the epilepsy argument adds this whole new layer to the long lost verses, or the verses that went missing. Muhammad must just legit have forgotten them, right? So this is definitely a interesting one. And then the sheep eating the thing, all that, it's just very interesting. Right on.
Okay, do you want to do another section after this, or should we end off? What do you want to do? There's still more comments, by the way.
We can take one more section, and this is kind of like is kind of a digression from the main point. I wouldn't have brought this up, the gate disturbance of Muhammad and possibility of maybe hydrocephalus, because I only brought it up because Dr. Didik Crooked brought it up.
Okay.
We'll do that, and then after that section, we will switch gears for the rest of the series, mostly towards his personality changes and his delusional beliefs. So I guess, yeah, after this coming section will be a good point to end for today.
All right, so let me go to the comments, because there are some interesting ones. Soren Alexander says Christianity has Paul, who many think might have been an epileptic, but not enough seems to really be known about him to apply this sort of extensive, amazing research. The miracle of Islam, we have the preserved epilepsy of Muhammad. It's just amazing. It is amazing, actually, isn't it?
Exactly.
Unintentionally, right?
Mm-hmm. Another comment that I'm just reading is, why does Gabriel relay a message to Momo when he has to go fix it later with a better message? Like, why is he giving him seizures?
That's a good point, man. If you guys are new here, don't forget to subscribe. Click the bell notification, as Salex T says. The ringing bell we missed. Actually, a couple of people in the comments said I didn't get notification today, so you got to click the ringing bell so that you'll be reminded of the next ringing bell episode. Yeah, so this is kind of like what I was kind of alluding to, but I wasn't saying it in this way. Like, they don't believe in mental illness and science, so how would you convince them with evidence? And yes, if they believe in magic, already there's no point. Magic and jinns and all of that, but there is a point. Look at Abdullah Gondal. Look at me. Look at all the ex-Muslims in the chat. Like, we all believed in this stuff. As stupid as it is, there's a way that it got into a psyche. In my case, Abdullah Gondal was born into the religion, meaning his parents raised him as a Sunni Muslim. I put this on myself. I converted to Sunni Islam from Ismailism. Ismailism doesn't have any of this stuff. There's not even hadith. Like, nobody cares about hadith. It's just like general seerah about Muhammad, and the Shia the Shia version, right? With Ghadir Qum and other such incidents being very important. And Ali's sword had two blades on it. It had a name called Zulfikar, but they don't go into this sort of stuff like this level of hadith. But there is a point. The point is that look at me, look at Abdullah Gonda, look at all the ex-Muslims in the chat today. Look at all the hundreds of people that have messaged us and messaged Harris Sultan, and for the work that we're doing, and like people that the faith has been shaken by these presentations, Muslims that are joining us and saying this makes sense what you guys are saying. I'm not totally sure what to do with this information. So there is a point, which is why we do this, right? The point is that it is having an impact. Like, we can't unfortunately share with you all of the impact because there's these people, they don't want necessarily, not ready to come out in public or whatever, so we're not able to tell you that, right? But there is a lot going on behind the scenes. Like we've told you before, we have a big da'i that's somewhere in the Muslim world that's left Islam, and he talks to us regularly. He's completely convinced that Islam is no longer, he's completely convinced.
There is a grand mufti of a country who's not a Muslim. I'm just gonna say that and leave it at that. Okay, so I'm not gonna name the country, the region, who is, but yeah, there are people at that caliber who have left the religion. It's just the timing, whenever they come out, whatever. But yeah, the point where the large tsunami is gonna happen, I believe, is getting closer and closer.
Adnan Hafiz, thank you for saying this. Cupping to the head is extremely dangerous.
That is indeed very dangerous. And as a Muslim, if you can see this, and there's so many hadithim, you can go on sunnah.com and write cupping head. You'll get quite a few. Now connect this with Muhammad's headaches, Muhammad's migraines, Muhammad's fainting. A lot of it starts to add up.
Adam says cupping is rampant in Malaysia. The Prophet was cupped while he was fasting in Bukhari. That can't be good for you. I was going to say, I just want to make one small comment. I'm not a fan of this, naturopathy and homeopathy and all this alternative medicine in general. But like a lot of, like, there's Olympians that do cupping, but they don't do the wet cupping. They do the dry cupping where they do suction, but they don't make a cut in the skin. And, I think some of it is superstitious. Maybe I'm not going to make comments about whether that's beneficial or not, but what we're seeing here is totally different. We're talking about wet cupping where you're cutting and you're pulling out blood. Obviously, I don't think there's any medical benefit to that, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But for sure, it's like, buyer beware. If you're going to do that, like,
there's an incident where Muhammad got cupped and the blood that came out, this one guy drank the blood, his companion. And then Muhammad prayed for his being blessed or something, and it's just bizarre, the delusion. We'll get to that later.
Okay, so I think that's enough comments. Let's finish off this.
Let's do this one last section, and then we're gonna call it a day for today. So Muhammad had a weird gait disturbance. Now we're not told when he acquired this. Did he have it all his life? Was it in the last latter half of his life? Last few years, but it is anomalous in a way where when you add up, hydrocephalus can consist of triad of symptoms where we have a urinary incontinence issue pop up, gait disturbance, and an enlargement of the head may pop up. Again, we have some evidence that alludes to Muhammad having some of these things, which is very interesting. But this is not, again, primary evidence for the epilepsy diagnosis. This is something that can coexist with epilepsy. Again, just view this section with a little bit of a grain of salt. But let's get into it. I'm going to get to the second part. The slide, sorry.
There's one more super chat. I just want to call it out because, again, Georgina coming to rescue again for the third time with 90 British pounds. That's a lot of money. Honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wow.
Okay. This is like wild to get so many donations from one person in one. We really appreciate this. Thank you. This is
thank you so much.
It's too much, but honestly, thank you. Deconverting a Grand Mufti, now that deserves a super chat. Science, reason, and logic has, and will be the future progress for mankind for sure. I don't know. Are we responsible for this, or are we? I don't know exactly. I think maybe we play a part in it.
Yeah,
I don't want to take all the credit for that,
exactly.
but it's someone that reached out to us, after having this experience. And of course, I don't want. I'm not going to take credit for this, but I will say maybe we played a part of it. Like can't really say more than that.
Another question I see in the comments: hydrocephalus in adults does not usually cause noticeable head swelling. Yeah, that is true. So that's the thing, right? We don't know. We've come to this large, but we don't know if he had it from his childhood and because this was from his birth and he had a large head before the skull plates fused together and hence it stayed, or was it if you have a hydrocephalus in adult, your skulls are all infused together, so the chance of your skull expanding is rare. So again, we're gonna just show you some pictures of people as well, but let's get to this section. We're gonna go to the first slide. So what are the symptoms of NPH? It's triad of difficulty walking, cognitive impairment, and impaired bladder control. So you can have a weird gait disturbance, mild dementia, like Muhammad sometimes displayed, and then urinary incontinence, impairment in bladder control. Now on the right side, we see hydrocephalus and epilepsy. Epilepsy is common among patients with hydrocephalus, and the risk of development of epilepsy continues indefinitely for those patients, right? Interesting little link. Now let's get to the next slide, where it's going to be a small little minute clip explaining by an expert, Dr. Marion Walker, how epilepsy and hydrocephalus coexist.
Well,
Common,
it's
uncommon?
I would say it's common.
Common.
Yes. Seizures associated with hydrocephalus is common. The reason for those seizures can vary. It could be related to the underlying cause of the hydrocephalus. Is there a malformation of the brain? Was there an infection that might have created the hydrocephalus and caused some seizure foci? Was there bleeding that might have done a similar thing? So the underlying cause is more than likely the cause also of the seizure.
So we realize that epilepsy and hydrocephalus can coexist, and it's common, like he said. That's an interesting one. Now, why did Dr. Dedekurkut even suggest that Muhammad might have suffered from hydrocephalus? This is where it gets interesting. Now, gait abnormality and megacephaly. So on the left side and top, we're going to go from the left to the right. Adab al-Mafrad, Abu Huraira said, when he faced someone, he faced him completely. So when Muhammad would turn, he would turn his whole body around. Okay, this is a gait disturbance we'll come to in a little bit. I have never seen anyone like him, and I will never see anybody like him. So even the companions you'll see will keep saying that the way Muhammad walked was so abnormal that they've never seen anybody like him. Now, the second one, it says, the Prophet, grant him peace, had a large head and large eyes. When he walked, he bent forward as if he was walking up a hill. When he turned around, he turned completely. Then it goes to the next one. He had long eyelashes. He's very broad. He walked on his entire foot, but they did not have a hollow. He turned completely towards people or turned his back completely. I have not seen anyone like him before or since. In Musnad Abu Talib, we see narrated by Ali that he had a large head, large hands. His face had a reddish color. When he walked energetically as is walking downhill. I never saw anyone like him before or since. Same thing when he walked energetically as if walking downhill. I've never seen anyone like him before or since. Now, this is a little bit weird, but what they mean by he walked energetically, but with a forward lean, going down a hill, these are hard to visualize, but I will show you a video which can somehow give you an idea. He says, when he walked energetically as if lifting his feet from a rock. Now, this could be a magnetic gait. I don't know exactly. I've never seen anyone like him before or since. May the blessings be upon him. So we find out a few details that Muhammad had a weird gait, of walking, a gait abnormality, a walking disturbance. This again happens if with hydrocephalus, where there's pressure from the fluids in the brain on certain parts of the motor cortex, which can result in gait abnormalities. A lot of other neurological disorders can cause similar things too, like Parkinson's, Huntington's, and whatnot. We also learned that he was megacephalic. He had a large head. Now, next slide is a video. This is not exactly what Muhammad's walk gait was, but this is very close to what it would have looked like. It's mute. You're on. So before we start the video, I just want to say that this video, I believe, is just demonstrating a Parkinsonian gait, which is not all exactly like the hydrocephalic gait, but this is the best, closest video I could find to what might resemble the ones reported in the hadith. Now, bear in mind, I don't know from what time these hadith are as to Muhammad always walk like this. Was he like this later on his life? So we don't know enough to be sure, but very interesting. Let's get to that video.
This gait is the gait that is a hypokinetic gait. The prototype is Parkinson's or Parkinsonian type of gait, in which the patient will have a posture in which he'll be stooped over, leaning forward, and then will have difficulty as far as initiating gait. When the gait is initiated, there are small steps. Oftentimes there's a tremor associated with this. And as the gait progresses, there may be a picking up of speed, or what's called a fenestrated gait. And then in turning, instead of having the normal turning, the patient will turn en bloc, which means they'll turn almost as a statue moving around. And then again, having difficulty starting in the marche petit pas.
So again, that was very interesting. Few things to notice, like Muhammad's hadith about his gait said that he was leaning forward and he walked as if energetically lifting his feet stuck on a rock. So I don't know if it's like he had a difficulty time initiating the gait or he was doing this. It's very, very interesting. And then the additional component where he would turn completely. And then the Sahaba being surprised that they've never seen anybody walk like him, which is a weird additional detail. Now, next slide, I'm just going to show you with the large head. So if people know what megacephalus in adults could look like, I did read about Muhammad for his large head. And the scholars do say he had a large head, but they justify it by saying that Jimmy Neutron had a large head, therefore big brain, therefore more intelligent, therefore prophet. That is not the case. In fact, these kind of anomalies are not something you should be proud of. This indicates pressure in the head, fluid in the head causing your head to swell up. But yeah, we see two adults with hydrocephalus that could have an enlarged head. Now, again, we don't have a picture of Muhammad to know if he indeed had head this big. Was it a little lesser? But it's in a very consistently reported detail that he had a large head, and then his gait was weird, and be leaning forward and whatnot. Now, next slide. Remember we talked about urinary incontinence being one of the third symptoms, or bladder control? Sometimes you don't have explicit references by Muhammad, but you have to fetch for him through reviewing his habits in his life. And this was noted by Dr. Didekurka too in his book. The Messenger of Allah was obsessed, and he said most of the torment of the grave is because of urine. Why? You could be 100 other things. Why is urine such a thing? And urination is the main cause of punishment in the grave. This is bizarre. Why is he so obsessed with urine cause, right? Allah's Messenger said, beware smearing yourself with urine because it is the main cause of punishment in the grave. Then on the right side, we see the Messenger of Allah passed by two new graves, and he said they are being punished, but they're not being punished for anything major. One of them was heedless about preventing urine from getting on his clothes, and the other used to walk about spreading malicious gossip. The Messenger of Allah passed by two graves, urine. He heard the voices, and then in the last one he says, again, urine drops over his body. He then took two branches of fresh date palm and then split them and dug them on each grave and said, soon if their punishment will be softened as long as these branches are green. Again, you see a weird connection between urine, out of all things, being the main cause of grave torture. It absolutely makes no sense unless Muhammad himself had issues with his own bladder control and that he was constantly smearing himself, and that insecurity came out in the form of you being tortured in your grave if you don't clean up.
Because urine is considered najis and dirty, and it's not like, because otherwise you would think, if this was anything other than urine, he would be like, this is a sign of the blessing. But of course, he can't say that because that seems, especially in that culture. I mean, in general, any culture, but other than the camel urine drinking thing, it's okay and weird. But anyway,
it's just bizarre, right? But yeah, this concludes this section, and then the next slide is going to have a big red background, and we're going to go through a personality change table, and from there on we kind of shift towards his personality changes.
Awesome.
But yeah, that was all for today, guys. Thank you for joining me. We'll have some questions, some comments for a few minutes.
Yeah,
and if you guys want to go over quickly just to prep you guys up for the next part, we can look at that table.
Okay, we'll quickly look at it and then we'll end off. Alrighty, yeah, there's some actually really excellent comments I want to share, which was, one of them is this one. Black Angel, she's always here in the chat and always making me laugh my ass off with the comments she's making. But she's being serious, and she says, you guys totally changed my image of Mo. Muslims who will watch this series will never again see Muhammad in the same light.
Yeah, if you see it once, that's it. You can never ever see the guy being a prophet. It's the evidence is too damning, too explicit, and like I said earlier too, that Muhammad should not be convulsing, forgetting, fainting, frothing at the mouth, and seizing at all, like none whatsoever. There's no exception. Like as soon as any of those things start popping up, you have a valid reason to point questions at his mental health, because from what we know now of modern neurology, and just why is God, like Ali Rizvi keeps saying, kicking him in the nuts every time he wants to talk to him, right? Whereas we have other epileptic or other patients that experience ecstatic or happy seizures, right?
Yeah, like that young guy.
Exactly. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a paradigm changing view, and the evidence, when you see it once, you're like, whoa, everything kind of starts making sense why he was so weird and bizarre. Another thing is, a lot of the times what people do is they expect Muhammad to behave like a normal person and follow normal thinking and logic, and when he doesn't, they say, oh, because he criticized himself or something, he can't be doing it for like his own personal desires, it has to be for God, right? A lot of times you have to change our expectations for Muhammad because he wasn't normal, right? So that's why we see a lot of his behaviors like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why did he start marrying all these women, 18 women in the last 10 years of his life, right? And why were they, some of them super young? And like a lot of them, like Muslims say like, oh, they were widows. Well, dude, they weren't widows because the fact that they were widows. They were widows because Muhammad made them widows, because he killed their husbands, and then he would ask them to marry him. Javeria, Safiya, Rayhana, all three of them, he killed their husbands and then married them, right? So
yeah. Absolutely. Sarah Laney says, I'm pretty much convinced you guys are right. I am convinced as well.
There is, the evidence is explicit. Well, my point was that it's so clear that it's on top of it's the Muslims' burden of proof now to prove us that these were revelations and not seizures. Like, the burden of proof has shifted due to the insane amount of evidence we have.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is a kind of funny comment, but I'll just share it anyways. Talking about the big head, it was Ludge because he always had some cups under his turban. That's interesting. I didn't realize he had a big head. I missed that. Someone said, imagine Salafis copy the walk that he had. Yeah, here it is. Hulk said, imagine Salafis have to copy that walk because they copied the companions all over too, right?
There were hadith where there's, I think it's Abdullah bin Omar. It's not a hadith, but after Muhammad had died, he's walking and he gets off his camel or his ride, and then he squats and he does nothing. He squats and gets up a few times from this place, and the guy's like, "What the hell are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I remember Muhammad got off at this spot and he did this, so I'm gonna just do it for that."
Yeah.
Right. So the same thing. Why is Muhammad obsessed with growing the beard, imitating Muhammad's way of living, lifestyle, dressing, shave the mustache, grow the beard? These are all signs of OCD and delusion. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Joig, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I don't know how those dots work. Said, friendly ex-Muslim, does Abdullah have a Patreon account? No, he doesn't. The donations that you make tonight will go to him. And also there's a To Abdullah's link on my blog. You can click on that and make a PayPal donation if you're listening to it after the show, because we don't have super thanks just yet. YouTube is working on that. They're slowly rolling that out. Once that comes out, then you'll be able to donate directly on the episode, and the money will go to both of us. But yeah, and again, thank you to Georgina, who donated a lot of money today. And honestly, most appreciated. Money is valuable, and this money is used. If you want to know where the money goes, the money goes towards Abdullah Gondal, so he can take more time to do this, because obviously he has to work a job as well, provide for his family. He has a wife and kids, and as well, I have a research assistant. He doesn't really do research right now, but he actually does a lot of the subtitles. I hire someone to help out with the thumbnails. Right now I don't have a video editor, but we're working on that, training him to do video editing as well. Tons of stuff that there's just no time for me to do this on my own. So the money is used for stuff like that, so the channel can keep going while I'm busy at my 9 to 5. And Abdullah Gondal, this work is so valuable that if we can actually get more money to do this, so that he can spend less time doing other things, that's just incredibly valuable. But of course, even if he didn't get a penny, he would still do this because he cares about humanity, and I care about humanity too. So at the end of the day, we love this topic. We're just like, we love this topic anyway, so we will talk about it. So I think that's all the great comments. There's probably more I missed. I apologize if I missed any good comments. Doorknob Head, thank you for the super chat as well, $50. I saw you on the other show, Apostate Aladdin, so you're making up for missing a show because you were on that show. But I'm just kidding. Apostate Aladdin and Infidel Noodle, the best buddies as well. So if you guys are watching this show, our show, it's all good. They're doing amazing work as well. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Oh, no, nothing. I was just gonna say thank you so much for all the good comments, the appreciation. I am so thankful to you guys. I just trying my best to do this, to get this information out. Again, I realize this is bigger than me, bigger than Samir. It's about a lot more people, their faith, and yeah, I hope it's spread and people realize and open their eyes.
Okay, last question since it came up, and then we'll end off with that little sneak peek. Does Gondal agree on the diagnosis of Geschwind syndrome? I don't even know what that is.
So that is exactly the next slide. So exactly the ensuing personality changes that happen have been called Geschwind syndrome by this doctor. But without going into too much details, I'm going to just quickly go over just a table. This will prime us ready us for the next part of the series. So on the left side, excessive guilt and hyper moralistic females can be part of the CPS patient's life experience. We see Muhammad obsessed with moral issues and whatnot. If we see this in Muhammad's life pattern, we can start to inquire his life experience is reality oriented. And obsessionalism may be seen in CPS patients, reflective of anatomically abnormal reverberating circuits that drive behavior to compulsive ideas, leading to ritualistic performances such as praying 5 times a day in a certain manner. These reverberating circuits also lead to the phenomenon of viscosity, by which is meant an obvious tendency to repetition that is clearly unnecessary. CPS patients may have a heightened abnormal sense of the personal, in which ordinary life events may be given a deep significance that is not warranted. Hypergraphia has been noted to be a symptom of CPS. Careful studies by Dr. Waxman and Shashdew have shown marked differential qualities of writing about their illnesses, distinguishing between general medical and CPS patients, a 100-fold difference. Another personality characteristic seen prominently in CPS patients is a heightened sense of religiosity. The sense of personal destiny may be expressed in a religious context in that the patient mistakenly misperceives himself as a messenger of God. The patient may experience mystical trance states, periods of impaired consciousness, something like being in a fog. The messenger's religiosity may become awkward or intrusive to others. This excessive religiosity was first noted by Dr. Esquirol in 1838. In 1919, by Dr. Boven, reported a case of a 14-year-old boy who, in a seizure, saw the god and the angels and heard the celestial fanfare music. Now, with that little summary of some things that might pop up on the right side, we see a full table. Now, we're just going to quickly mention what it says. Emotionality, deepening of all emotions, sustain intense effect. Elation and euphoria, grandiosity, exhilarated mood, diagnosis of manic depressive illness. Sadness, discouragement, tearfulness, self-depreciation, diagnosis of depression, and suicide attempts. Anger, increased temper and irritability. Aggression, over hostility, rage attack, violent crimes, murder. Altered sexual interest, loss of libido, hyposexualism, fetishism, transvestism, exhibitionism, hypersexual episodes. Guilt, tendency to self-scrutiny and self-recrimination. Hypermoralism, attention to rules with an inability to distinguish significant from minor infractions. Desire to punish offenders. Obsessionalism, ritualism.
Wow, there's lots of stuff. Don't give it all away right now. Leave some for the next episode.
Let's gonna finish this and then we'll call it a night. Ritualism, orderliness, compulsive attention to detail, circumstantiality, pedantic, overly detailed, peripheral, viscosity, stickiness, tendency to repetition, sense of personal. Events given highly charged, personalized significance, divine guidance ascribed to many features of patient's life. Hypergraphia, keeping extensive diaries, detailed notes, writing autobiography or novel. This can come out as verbal poetry as well. Religiosity, holding deep religious beliefs, often idiosyncratic, multiple conversions, mystical states. They develop philosophical interest, nascent metaphysical or moral speculations, cosmological theories, dependence and passivity. Cosmic helplessness at hands of fate, protestations of helplessness, humorlessness and sobriety, overgenerated ponderous concern, humor lacking or idiosyncratic, and paranoia lastly, suspicious, overinterpretive of motives and events, diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Wow, so that actually sounds in a lot of ways fitting. It's almost like I'm kind of reading into Muhammad's life right there. But yeah, that's the description of a lot of his behaviors. Now, I'm not going to go any further in terms of showing you what's next, but I'm going to quickly just share one of my screens, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of what to expect and what's left for the next episodes. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Oh, okay. Share my screen. Yeah.
I got it there. Perfect. So I'm actually sharing my screen now. Can you share my screen? And I'm just gonna go over the.
Oh shoot! I thought that was your screen.
Right on. Yeah. So we have anger. Muhammad's face turning red due to anger. He would scream at people. Didn't smile that much. Muhammad would get his face red a lot at times. It's anomalous. His anxiety and paranoia was well known. His sexuality. There's an episode coming up. A lot of weird stuff. His capgrass, where he'd mistake Dia Kalbi as an angel. His delusions, where he was literally high as hell, looking at colorful trees and butterflies flying around. His holy spittle, his bodily delusions, his other delusions, we're seeing things. Then the hypergraphia part comes about, where we analyze the Quran. Why is he violent? We have lots of interviews popping up from Dr. Abbas Adlian, expert. We get to the OCD here. He even mentions it. Dr. Alisina mentioned it. Then we get to Karen Armstrong, the cases that are, this is all cases all the way till like 4:15, and then we end up here. And then I'll keep adding slides as I go further along. But yeah, this was it for today, and I just want to let you guys know we will see you next week, probably on Sunday. Any closing comments from Samir? Any last questions?
Yeah, I won't do any more questions now, but I'm gonna highlight one more super chat, which is $20 Canadian from Qasim Wasim saying, "Keep doing what you guys are doing. The work really is bigger than all of us." Like you said, that's touching words. Also, Gonda, I'd love to talk to you. Please let me know when I can do so. So I asked him to email me, and I'll try. I told him that you're pretty busy, but I'll try to get you guys in touch. So my email is public. It's just abdullah.adam@gmail.com. And anyone can email me. That's fine. I do check my email. And with that, we're gonna call it a wrap. Thank you, Doorknob Head. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, Qasim, and everybody else that donated earlier on in the show, whether big or small amounts. And of course, for coming here and joining us and making this, your comments make the show much more interesting. It's not only the super chat, it's just the comments too. Your comments make, especially if you have questions that are related to the content that someone else is going to be thinking, especially if you're Muslim and you're thinking, well, what about this? Right? Or even if you're not Muslim and you're thinking, that question about the sexuality was highly relevant, right? And so you're able to address these questions, which is great, because after the show is done, we don't necessarily have as much time to engage, maybe on Twitter, but then people won't see it. So if you're here live, and in terms of the timing, unfortunately, we have to do it at this time because that's the time where both of us are available. If possible, we'll try to, I'd love to do earlier as well during the day, but it's just not necessary. It's not possible right now for both of us to have that time in common. Maybe at some point. But in the future we'll try to do it earlier, because I do know this time is a little bit difficult for people. But yeah, no, that's great, and thanks for everyone that joined us tonight. And the next episode is going to be great. There's a lot of characteristics there that, like, as soon as you said them, for example, self-scrutiny, religiosity, obviously, paranoia, lack of humor. That's a big one, because there's a lot of comments from Muhammad about laughing, deadens the heart. So there's a lot of stuff coming to from the next episode, and maybe we'll have some more from Farid Gangur Telly. Maybe he'll actually respond. I don't know. That'll make it interesting. If we get some responses.
Yeah, definitely. But at this point, it's like, if he makes a response, it's gonna be just like you're gonna end up with Muslims watching this video, and you have about so many references that you have to refute. There's so many corroborating versions of hadith from both Sunni and Shia corpuses, and then, I mean, like, there's just so much. It's like opening a can of worms. And like, I do feel like he did, by making that response video initially, did push me to do more research, which ended up backfiring. And now we have this amazing series going on. So yeah, thanks to Farid in an indirect way for motivating me.
Awesome. Okay, everyone, it's been a wrap, and have a lovely day or night. Stay safe. As a good friend Haris Sultan would say, Science Hafiz.
Science Hafiz, and until